5, so we can pick it up from here. Welcome, everybody. I'm trying to figure out where my agenda is, but I'll use my paper agenda. If the staff could call the roll, please, that would be great.
Yes, indeed. Okie doke. Greg Braille.
I'm here.
Bill Burton.
Here.
Tony Carrasco. Not here yet. In-Young Cho. Not here yet. Larry Klein.
Here.
Nadia Nayak.
Here.
Keith Reckdahl.
Here.
David Shen.
He's going to be late. He's taking his kid to a doctor's appointment. She'd be here around 5:30.
Okay. Carrie Templeton.
Here.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Okay. So we're missing 3, which in our small group is a lot. So we'll see how we go. Oh, there's In-Young. Yay. Okay. So that's good. She's just arrived. So staff updates would be great. Do we have any update on the town hall?
No update on the town hall as of yet. We're still waiting for the final report, which I believe we'll be getting sometime soon. I'm not sure we got a date from them, but they're working on it right now. I think maybe next week we're going to have it completed.
Okay.
We'll be sending it to council along soon after as well.
Okay. And will XCAP get it at the same time, or how does that work?
Oh, we'll share it with XCAP as soon as we have it.
Okay, great. Awesome. Okay. Anything else?
So I know XCAP requested for some information regarding the Loma Verde Avenue bike plan.
Yeah.
What we found was that in January of 2019, council directed staff to separate from the study the bicycle and pedestrian crossing of the Caltrain corridor in the vicinity of Loma Verde Avenue and incorporate that into the North Ventura Coordinated Area Access Plan process. So North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan is what looking into the walkable and mixed use neighborhood. And so as a result, they probably should be looking into the bike. They should also be looking into the bike pedestrian bike lane for Loma Verde. Currently, as we previously have also mentioned that the project is not currently in the city's 5-year capital improvement project budget for the funding of infrastructure project. And usually, when such projects are prioritized, they will be awarded for design and construction in our budget, and they will follow with the construction after as the funding becomes available for that project. So at this time, it's not in our 5-year capital improvement project budget. That is about the Loma Verde would find.
Thank you. And then just for some more color, but it has not been discussed at NVCAP, correct? Keith is on the NVCAP, the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan, also.
Yeah, that is correct. It might have been mentioned once, but we've done no work on it whatsoever, and we're wrapping up, so I suspect it's going to be abandoned.
Okay.
Our next meeting is Thursday the 8th, and we'll discuss whether we're going to discuss it then. Okay.
Staff, I just want to let you know, I got a text from Tony saying he's having trouble getting in. So I don't know if Sarah, you might be able to help him with that. And I did want to acknowledge, we never really talked about Keith's camera can't be on because Keith usually calls in from work. So I just wanted to make sure, because I was asking him about that today. He's like, I don't have a camera at work. So I just wanted folks at home to understand that these are the limitations of Zoom and where we have to operate to do these meetings. And so I wanted to recognize that. Didn't want anyone thinking, Keith, that you're just hiding from us permanently. So, okay. And
I just want to say something. Well, I have a big tree that somehow the tree branches fell, a big ring fell. The tree guys are going to come in like 10-20 minutes. I just have to go out and discuss with him. So I might be not responding at a certain point today.
No worries. Thank you. Good luck with your tree. It is 2020. My thoughts are
it's like 70 foot high tree. Just
oh boy.
I mean, like branches, the rim fell down. So anyway. Okay.
Oof. Okay. All right. With the staff update, it looks like we can move then to oral communications. And I see only, this is for items not on the agenda, just as a reminder. And it looks like we've got 2 speakers. So we can do 2 minutes each for oral communications. So if my timers want
Yeah.
to take it away. Before you start that, Tony, another Zoom invite has been sent to you. So try checking your inbox if you're listening. I will also text him while you guys are going.
All right.
Thank you.
We have two people with raised hands. The first speaker is Carrie Wagner, followed by David Kennedy. Gonna allow you to talk, Carrie. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'd like to talk some more about the Loma Verde underpass. That seems to have almost been abandoned. I'd like to catch that before it's abandoned. I understand it's not in the 5-year plan, but I don't understand why, because it was in the bike pedestrian plan adopted in July 2012. And I looked at, there's a feasibility study that was done mostly for the Matadero Creek path in, what was it, 2016? And it doesn't talk a lot about the intercrossing, but it shows some potential spots where it could come out. So it looks like Loma Verde undercrossing would come out perfectly situated for the NVCAP, for the North Ventura housing area. Since I assume we're putting housing there, that's an ideal site for housing. It really would make sense to have this done because we could get people from North Ventura to Midtown. We could get Midtown people to North Ventura and to El Camino. And I just see that as a real benefit for anyone in South Palo Alto, but particularly the NV people. And so I'd really like to, I'm not quite sure how to get this pushed through some more. I understand that the NVCAP has not had enough time to discuss this, but I'm wondering what we need to do to get this pushed through. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have David Kennedy. If you can unmute yourself.
Yes, good afternoon. This is David Kennedy again. You're probably getting tired of hearing from me. I just wanted to follow up on a note I sent to XCAP electronically last week, asking the question is whether there's been any consideration, assuming proceeding with the vehicle closure of Churchill, any consideration to going into an overcrossing rather than an undercrossing. I don't know how this is viewed by the bicycle folks, whether overcrossings are better, same, whatever, but I think it would solve some of the construction problems, might even be cheaper. But I think I would hope that now that there's an entirely different need at Churchill, assuming we proceed with that closure, that might make sense as a mitigation measure to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes all our public speakers for this section.
Great, thank you. Does staff have anything else to add? I know that the bike plan is going to be rethought. Philip, is there maybe an update about when the bicycle plan, the 2012 bicycle plan, I know it was supposed to be in progress. Is that funded in our capital improvements budget or Ripon, do you know?
My understanding is that we are looking into planning for an update fairly soon. So, yes, it should be either getting into the progress for an update for bike and pedestrian master plan.
And does is that's the general plan, and then projects from within that are selected for funding as it becomes available, or how does it usually work? I'm not as familiar with the funding of the bike plan. So
yeah, I'm not very familiar with that either. If Philip is around, he can probably answer that one.
He's back.
Yeah, sorry, I had to step away for just a moment. So the bike and ped plan is probably it's got funding that's gonna pay for it next year. So probably the process next fiscal year. So probably the process for starting it is going to start towards the end of this fiscal year. And for those members of the public who are listening, the fiscal year starts on July 1 for the city. So next July is probably when we would start working on the new bike and ped plan. The bike and pedestrian plan is separate from the city budget process, obviously, where the city budgetary process, is part of determining what projects will move forward. And obviously the city is in a not great financial situation this current fiscal year and likely next fiscal year as well. But that said, a project being in the bike and ped plan does not mean it's happening, or does not mean necessarily that there would be a budgetary action that would prepare it. It's just a set of recommendations for what we could do to improve our bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and bicycle and pedestrian travel throughout the town. So, you know, again, we'll be looking to do that. And if the city were to come into a windfall of funding or obtain some kind of grants or other things, those are the types of projects that we would apply for grants for. And that's what we have done. So that's why we've obtained some grant funding specifically for projects that were identified in the bike and ped plan.
Okay.
I don't know if I answered all of your questions, but
yeah, I think that's helpful. Yeah. So basically, if it's in the plan, it has a chance of we can use it to apply for grant funding. And then once the money comes, then it's got a better chance of having a buildability, but it gets prioritized.
That's right. So it's usually unlikely to get grant funding outside of the city, regional grant funding or federal or state grant funding, if it's not already identified in your bike and ped plan. So it usually needs to be already identified in the bike and ped plan to obtain funding. That said, that doesn't mean also that the city couldn't opt to fund something that either is or isn't in the bike and ped plan, but it's also more likely if it's been fleshed out, it's gone through council, it's gone through the public process, that the bike and ped plan would go through, you know, like going through payback and all the other, you know, community input processes that occur.
So was SEAL on the bike plan as well? Because I know it was part of the 2013 rail corridor study, but I just don't know if it was part of the.
I do believe so, but just noting that our bike and ped plan is now out of date. So
yeah, I got that. Yeah. Okay.
I do believe it was identified in the 2012 bike and ped plan.
Great, thank you. And just a quick response to David Kennedy. I'm obviously not an engineer, but the quick answer to your question is underpasses by their nature tend to take up less space and less length than overpasses do. So when the underpass was sort of not looked at, a full underpass that went all the way under Churchill because of the property impacts, an overpass would have had even lengthier impacts. That's something that my organization looked at when high-speed rail was coming to town, and that was a lesson that we learned. So just wanted to respond
Nadia,
to
also
yeah.
You have to go up 16 feet and you only have to go down 10.
Right, yeah, because you have to have clearance for vehicles and whatnot. Thank you for that, Tony. So that's part of why it's longer and therefore has more impacts into the neighborhoods on cross streets. So, okay, great. So moving on, we have number 4, which is XCAP member updates and working group updates. So first is, hold on, I've got so many papers here, I'm drowning. We can talk about the city council. So I gave the update to city council on Monday. In reflecting on how to talk to city council about what we've been working on, it occurred to me that sort of pre-pandemic, we got a lot done between October and February before the world sort of stopped. And so it was good to recap that for the council, who I think is also sort of settling into a pandemic world and able to sort of absorb all of this. And so I want to pass along congratulations and thanks to each and every XCAP member and Office of Transportation staffer who works on this. We got a lot of praise from council for the work that we've done, especially under duress, and for almost keeping up with council in terms of having just as many very long meetings very consistently throughout this entire time. And so I would be remiss if I didn't pass that along to everybody. So a big thanks to each of you for continuing to come here week in and week out under such hard circumstances and fire. It's like, it's amazing. So thank you to everybody. It was a study session, so there was no council direction that was given. We had some sort of thoughts expressed, but generally it was just to give them an update of where we were. So wanted to pass that along. I don't know if anybody else was listening in. Was there anything that was significant? Did I miss anything that you would say? Anybody watch? No, it's okay if you didn't. There's a lot of Zoom meetings these days.
I was there. I thought you did a great job, and I thought we had a really good discussion with City Council.
Right.
You know, the idea of the change in the size of this body was brought up a lot. Do you want to share any more detail about that?
Sure. I mean, we just talked about the fact that we've gone from 14 members to 9 members, and that the council recognizes that, you know, we're missing some voices, but we're going to do our best to continue to move forward. There's a lot of discussion about asking for pros and cons, which I explained we will be doing. What else did we talk about? Oh, we talked about the significance of 4 tracks. We kind of had a discussion about that. And so I think including Sebastian Petty's testimony was helpful for the policymakers.
Definitely.
Greg, did you have something you said you watched as well?
Yeah, I watched. Yeah, I mean, it was preceded by a long string of public comments along the lines of, please don't do too much. And I think that might have affected it, but it did seem like there was not a lot of enthusiasm for give us your final recommendation so we can move on. There seemed to be more support for whatever you do, and I'm still in support of us having a recommendation, but whatever you do, give us a lot of information on what you decided, how you decided, and what the process was, so that whatever happens after this, they can go back and say, oh, well, that's why, you know, a majority or a minority said the following, rather than simply saying we recommend this and move on from it. Because I think this process has got a long way to go after what we're doing this month.
Thank you. Yeah, so that was actually something that I learned as well. I think the tired and beleaguered side of me was like, fine, we'll just summarize this report and be done with it. But really, the council really did want to hear all the nuance and the details, and kind of encouraged us to really put as much in there as we can, so that this is sort of a document for the ages. So when we write this, and as we, whether it's just the recommendations or whether there's dissenting opinions or all of that, as much as we can put in there, I think it's definitely worth us putting in there as a group. So I think that was, thank you for highlighting that. I think that was important. Yeah, Tony.
So I didn't attend the meeting, but I did read the article that you sent over, Nadia, and I got 2 things from that article, and I think both are really wise. That firstly, that they would like pros and cons on each of these alternatives, and my view is that is wise, because each of the alternatives have good things and bad things. All of them are bad, but we have a lot more information now, and I think by rethinking it now with this new information, I think we'll do better. And I think the second issue is that some of the criteria from Caltrain and high-speed rail, like 4 tracks, is not there. They're not there yet, so slowing it down would be a good thing. And those are the 2 things that I got from them. Mm-hmm. Both were good.
For folks wondering, this is the Palo Alto Weekly put an article up about, I don't know, 2 hours ago, summarizing what council talked about last night. So that's the article that Tony is referring to. Anybody else? Phil, did I see you had your hand up?
No.
No,
just
okay.
Scratching my forehead.
No worries, scratching is allowed. Okay, so with that, sorry, yeah, Larry.
Just one little fact emerged that I hadn't heard before, and that is that our city manager said that the council wouldn't start deliberating on our report until sometime next year. So,
yeah.
So, which is understandable. It means that certainly the council will have at least 1 new member, and we'll see what happens to the other seats on the council. But it makes it clear that when we're writing our report, we're writing to at least for one person who may not have had much involvement with us at all.
And I think it's important we preserve as much context as we can, because whatever happens to this particular body, you know, a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, we might not remember. Nadia might, but we might not remember all of the nuances that we understand now. So I think this makes the report writing very important.
Well, thank you for that, Greg. But even I think my head is full at this point. So, but it is helpful to think about, number one, that we may have October 30th may be tight, because I think we're appreciating that writing between this many people is hard. But also, yeah, the audience and who we're writing for is important. So, Okay, with that, ex-cappers, you do have in here a document that basically shows the chapters that have been turned in. It's up number 4A. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. And so we are expecting you guys to turn in any edits that you have on those chapters. And if I remember correctly, I think our deadline, Sarah, if you're listening, if you can remind me, I think our deadline is tomorrow at 4. I think it's on here. Yes, if that's possible. I heard an O. Yes, Phil.
I'm struggling, and that's my struggle, to get a revised chapter 4 input by this deadline.
Okay.
Last time I thought the deadline was Friday morning at 10, not Thursday at 4.
Okay.
Clarify that.
We could try. Sarah, I don't know if that would work for you. You can probably chat with her offline. Honestly, if it has to go another week, it's not the end of the world. I mean, we're still deliberating, and we've got lots of other chapters to edit. So
it may just be. I'm sorry to have to say that.
Oh, it's okay. I mean, it's hard now. You guys are all working as a group as well, and so coordinating is difficult. So no worries. It's understandable.
I'll do my level best anyway, even if I do have that extra time.
Thank you.
Nadia, I think we were referring more to the chapters that have already gone through one level of editing.
Yes.
In contrast to Phil's chapter 4, which will be new, more or less.
Correct.
I think we really do need to keep, if we can, to a deadline of either tomorrow at 4 or Friday at whatever, on chapters 1, 2, and 6.
Yes.
You've now had for quite some time, and we're not asking for a total rewrite. We're just asking for whatever suggestions and revisions. So it shouldn't take as much time drafting a whole new chapter.
Yeah, and I do want to leave open, ideally we'll edit and not have to touch these chapters again, but I do suspect that once we crunch this all and put it into one big context, we may still have further edits. But to the extent possible, as much as we can get kind of larger edits in now, that would be super helpful. Oops, my computer just did something weird. I don't know what that was. Okay. All right. Anybody else have any questions or issues with their chapter or? Nope, we're good. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. I got a text from staff. I'm on a group text with staff and one of their computers just shut off, but it looks like we're still recording and everything's still working. So unless I hear otherwise, we're going to just keep going. Okay. So that brings us to item number 5, which is to continue deliberations on Meadow Charleston. So this is the part of the meeting where if you spoke already and gave your public comment for Charleston Meadow, we're going to ask that you allow the others who didn't get a chance last week to please speak. You can always email us your comments. We do have a list of the folks that spoke last week. So we're asking just new voices to speak at today's meeting. And if you could digitally raise your hand, then that would help me understand how many speakers we're going to have and allot the time appropriately. Looks like we have about 18 attendees and only 1 hand up. I'm a little concerned that we have so many less people than normal. Maybe you're right, Greg, that the school board meeting killed everybody's mood to want to join Zoom meetings at this time. I just find it strange. Normally we have an average of about 30 attendees. So I see 2 hands raised. I'm just going to give folks another minute. If you did not speak at last week's meeting and you have some comments about our deliberations for Meadow Charleston, now would be the time to put your hand up. All right, I got 3 takers so far. All right, everyone's going to get 3 minutes. And so I will turn it over to Jose and Chirag, who are my timekeepers and list keepers today.
Yeah, we have about 3 people who raise their hands, and I did check with the list. And our first speaker is going to be Elizabeth Alexis. You are now unmute. If you can unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. And then Chirag, I can't see Chirag's screen. I think he was the.
Oh, his laptop was the one who died.
Yeah.
Here, let's see if I can do a clock on my thing. Hold on.
Okay.
What?
Bear with us, Elizabeth.
Just a second. We have any?
We're trying to do timers here. So let me make sure I give you 2 minutes and not 2 hours.
What? I want 2 hours.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, so
Just a quick update as we're setting that up, just to note, Shirag his laptop is not turning back on. So
Okay.
you have to, if you got your phone ready, that'd be appreciated.
I've got my phone ready. I've got 3 minutes for Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, if you're ready to go, I'm going to try to put my phone in front of my camera so you can see how much time
I
we
just
have.
want to say that never in all my years in the business world has this problem ever happened before.
Well, 2020. All right, Elizabeth, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you to the committee. I do want to start and just acknowledge how much work everybody on staff, everybody on the committee, all the consultants, like in through a pandemic, this is not easy. And I know you guys have gone above and beyond. I mean, not just being there during meetings, but doing a lot of work outside and coming forward with all sorts of innovative things. Like, this is what kind of gives me hope, despite, I would say, some frustrations with this process. First thing I want to just make sure I say is, I'm obviously in support of the idea that I brought forward, which of doing some kind of underpass solutions at Charleston and Meadow. At first, I just brought this forward because I wanted to make sure we were looking at all options over time. There are things that I think these have tremendous potential. I don't think they're there yet, and I don't think taking a vote on things which are not fleshed out enough that people can really understand them and where they connect with other pieces, I think that's a real problem in a process. Building grade separations in built out constrained areas on active railroads that are not concrete nightmares. This requires compromise and a focus on details, and that is not the current process, which is at this sort of kind of very conceptual level of design. We need details, and that tells us whether this will work or not, especially for bikes and peds. It's tempting to choose a solution that just leaves in place today's flawed transportation grid for motorized and non-motorized traffic. But that's probably not the right solution for the next 10, 20, 50, 100 years. There is currently a paradigm shift underway in transportation engineering that thinks more about the neighborhoods that cars pass through and less about the cars. We want to be the first project in the next paradigm and not the last one in the old one. I think sometimes we think about having to rethink scope or iterating that this is a terrible thing. This is a good thing. It means we now have a better understanding of the problem. And I think you guys should congratulate yourselves on that. Some of the things that we've learned, and I think that I've been thinking about more, are that separating Alma and the train tracks has significant benefits for both pedestrians, bicyclists, and cars. It then makes it possible to redesign the part of Charleston between Alma and El Camino that's currently like a freeway, to carry the same amount of traffic, but just be much safer and much more pleasant for the people who live along the streets. I would just note that the underpass was the only concept that didn't really show sort of gridlock in 10 years. I do hear the concerns from neighbors and fellow cyclists. I think this is the beginning of an interesting conversation, not the end of one. And I would, really hope that we can see that that's what needs to be done next. And that we do this work with Caltrain. I think they can be a real partner, and we can make progress in a way that I just don't think PSC is possible.
All right.
Thank
you so
Elizabeth.
much. Next we have is Karen Kalinsky, followed by Richard Perky.
Okay.
Karen, if you can unmute yourself.
I've muted myself, and I'm maybe hoping to see a timer.
We can hear you. Can you see the timer now?
Okay, I can see it now. I'll go ahead.
Cool.
I live on East Meadow Drive, a few blocks from the tracks, and I'll express my preferred options as applying to both Meadow and Charleston. I agree with you all that although some city council members asked XCAP to just report pros and cons of each alternative, that would not sufficiently capture and convey the knowledge and expertise that XCAP has arduously built. So please report your recommended alternative, or perhaps the ones that have received at least 3 XCAP yes votes. Clearly, none of the alternatives are ideal. So it comes down to how residents, XCAP, and the city council prioritize the various criteria to be considered. My personal highest priority criteria are, in the very high category, equally: bike pedestrian safety, avoiding private property acquisition, and not running into serious engineering challenges, for example, the trench having to divert creeks. I feel strongly we must protect cyclists, and particularly young cyclists, as the most vulnerable people traversing our crossings. All in all, I would say that there are, to my opinion, two best options, which are the underpasses for Meadow and Charleston or the viaduct. The Meadow Charleston underpasses have the advantage of separating bikes and peds from vehicle traffic, but you have to go up and down under the tracks and follow a convoluted path. But on the other hand, there are private property acquisitions, including 3 single-family homes and 1 14-unit apartment building. If this option is selected, the city should consider subsidizing a new affordable apartment building be built on the same site. Also, the lack of turning movements will force some traffic into neighborhood streets. The second of my preferred alternatives is the Meadow Charleston Viaduct, which has the advantages that bikes and peds crossing staying at grade, which will accommodate a wider range of abilities, and lines of sight are maintained. On the other hand, there are negative visual impacts. I'm hoping to learn more from XCAP about zoning changes for houses close to the tracks that could somehow address these visual impacts to some degree. I would like to thank you, XCAPers, for all your thoughtful and thorough consideration of these very complex issues. And particularly, I'd like to thank Keith for holding a Q&A session for the Meadow Charleston residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Richard Perky. If you can unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to give input. And once again, XCAP is confronted with the huge challenge of, instead of choosing between great options, kind of choosing the lesser of evils. From my standpoint, the options that require creek diversion should be set aside. The flooding risk for residents west of the railroad corridor is too great, and the challenges to getting approvals for what has been contemplated there simply make those unworkable options. So in effect, that puts out the trench and the tunnel options, I think, are not very viable. The underpass option does put instead of the railroad underground, it puts the vehicle and pedestrian and bicycle traffic under as an undercrossing. I thought the ideas are very creative and present some really great opportunities to think through that process, but I just kind of don't think it's there yet. In particular, I'm very concerned about the number of properties that have to be taken to be able to complete the project as it's been sort of fleshed out to this point. And so I would have to, at this point, recommend that you also pass on the underpass option. So that unfortunately leaves you with the hybrid and the viaduct. I say unfortunate because it requires raising the rail bed and some pretty nightmarish construction proposals for it. But choosing between the two, certainly in terms of a cost and a lower profile, I would have to recommend the hybrid over the viaduct, and would hope that in further engineering studies and looking at this, there isn't some way to bring down the elevation of the track in the viaduct option. Again, you guys have a terrible task ahead of you in choosing between these options, none of which are great. But at this point, based on the analysis that you've done to this point, I would have to fall back and recommend the hybrid option. Thanks.
Thank you. Looks like we have one more speaker, Wendy Ackers. Allow you to talk. I don't see her on the list. So go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, first I wanted to start by thanking the XCAP, the CAP, and CARD, and staff, because it's been years that you guys have been looking at this. So what I'd like to do is take you guys on a little trip. So if you could just humor me, Close your eyes, put yourself in your car, and let's tootle over to 101. And as we get on 101, look on either side the sound walls. And as you're looking at them, Caltrans says they need to be 12 to 16 feet. Imagine that sound wall with a big giant train on top of it. Now let's freeze a section and let's pick up that section, and we're going to move it to where the train tracks currently are. And we're going to drop this sound wall with the train on top of it, right smack in between 4 or 5 neighborhoods. That's what the hybrid would do. On the one side, you would have the homes looking at the 15-foot and with the train above the roof lines. And on the other side, yes, you'd have a little bit of landscaping to soften it on the Alma side. When it comes to the underpass, the issue that I see with that option is the fact that you have eminent domain. As much as I dislike the elevated option, and I much prefer the trench, both the elevated and the trench allow there to be, I want to say, visually, all these neighborhoods stay connected. So that's just what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public speakers.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, so a couple things. So the last time we kind of had a temperature check, which was a while ago, I think Keith was really trying to talk about the trench. And so I wanted to allow Keith some time to kind of make his case for the trench. It's something obviously we've heard a lot from the community about. So I'm going to give Keith a chance to do that. And then I just wanted to let ex-cappers know in advance. The other thing I want to do is have a more structured discussion today to make it a little bit easier for everyone to follow the threads. And because I heard from the feedback that the community really wants to hear when we're voting for something and when we're voting against something, and hear more from each ex-capper as to the why. And so I think using the dynamic matrix to ground that conversation would really help us each kind of express ourselves point by point on all the different things that are kind of sticking points for us. So today we'll do it in a different, more methodical way that hopefully will create less confusion. So I just wanted to throw that out there first. Keith, I know I had given you a heads up that I was going to kind of call on you. So are you ready, and do you have stuff for us?
Yeah, I put together my thoughts on some slides to make it so it's just not a rambling man talking.
Awesome. And then Keith, when obviously we didn't get these out to the public in advance, since I know you finished them this afternoon. So after today's meeting, if you wouldn't mind getting those to Sarah so she could post them for the public.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks. I'll let you take it away if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, I'll share my screen.
I know you can't do camera.
No camera, but here's my screen. Let me know when you see it.
Yep, we see it.
Okay. Yeah, and I want to point out, these are my opinions. They're not XCAP, so if anyone's watching, they have not been vetted by the rest of the XCAP. These are my personal opinions. And also, I'm an engineer, but not a civil engineer. So these are lay opinions. And so it's take that into account. Okay. Okay. And so I want to go through the trench. A lot of people, my neighbors, I live in Charleston Meadow. My neighbors love the trench. It comes with a lot of baggage, or at least perceived baggage. And so I want to walk through this and explain my take on all the different issues. The AECOM does go through and does talk about these issues, but they really don't say whether they're solvable or not. They just kind of throw them on the table and then make you worried. It reminds me of the standard marketing FUD, fear, uncertainty, and what is the D? By the way, fear and uncertainty on the doubt. Thank you. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And they, I mean, if you have issues, whenever you have a complicated, like Elizabeth said, this is a rail separation in a developed area. There's going to be some trade-offs. There's going to be some problems. Question is, are these problems solvable? Are they not solvable? So let's walk through the different issues. The first one is cost. Cost scares the hell out of people, and rightfully so. And I want to add some comparisons to trenches that were actually built and look at that and compare what they actually were built for. Another is construction duration. The creek interference, when this trench, it will interfere with Adobe Creek. Question is how much. Groundwater issues, interference both with groundwater leaking in and also interference with just the flow, natural flow of groundwater underground. And finally, tiebacks. These tiebacks keep the the walls of the trench from caving in, and they prevent you from planting trees, and also will have an easement on the people whose backyard goes up against the fence there. Okay, so let's talk about cost. And we started looking at these trenches that were actually built. Here are 6 different designs. Ours is the top line. And the 2 in green are actually built. They're completed. So their numbers are the final cost for including overruns and everything. And it turns out that these trenches, I have a column here that lists length. I do not list width, but these all end up being wider than ours. Ours is just a 2 rail, and some of these are 3 or even wider. So that's another thing. They're going to have more excavation. But even with this now, if you look at our cost is about $800 to $950 million, so almost $1 billion. These others down here are all in the neighborhood of 300 to 400 million. Just a bargain. Just 300 to 400 million. Some of these are longer, but like for example, the one in Reno has 11 overpasses compared to our 2s, and we know overpasses are not cheap. And all of these, except I'm not sure about Phoenix, whether that's in the water table, but they all have to deal with going down into the water table, and that makes your construction more complicated and you have to have a watertight trench, and so it really does change some things. But if you take the total cost and divide by the linear length, the length of the trench, not the width, just the length, it turns out that they're all in family about $40,000 per linear foot. Reno retrack is significantly less, but that was 2005, and these dollars are not necessarily in the same year. There's a caveat down here. But yet they're all in this 40, and if you multiply 40 by the length of our trench, it'd be much, much lower. And so it'd be less than 300 million. So what scares us is this $800 million price tag, but if that was down to 300, that totally changes the trench conversation. And so right there, just that one answer kind of flips whether this is undoable or doable. And so this is a really hard thing because we're trying to down select and make a recommendation, but yet we have these totally incongruent answers. We have the estimate, the AECOM has come up here, and all the estimates down here for these, including 2 that have been built and are running right now. So I really question when you have this cluster of data and you have one outlier. It's like Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the other. I really question whether this, and it could be that they just put a lot of uncertainty. They're worried about a lot of stuff, and so they just put uncertainty. This is a ROM cost, and there's different strategies for putting ROM costs. But whenever you have some uncertainty in a project, you throw extra money on just to be safe, because you won't get chastised if there's a cost underrun. So this really unsettles me, the fact that a lot of people are throwing out the trench simply because this number up here, this $800 million, and the evidence that I have shows that that's not consistent. Okay, and I mentioned in the previous slide that they're not necessarily the same data. Carlsbad, when they did their analysis, they actually went back and just looked now at construction. There's a lot of costs when you make a trench, the design, et cetera. But if you just look at the construction costs, they took the construction costs from the years that they were done and then adjusted for inflation to get new costs, again, per linear foot. So this is, again, the cost of the trench per length of the trench. And there's now the Reno trench, if you look in the previous slide, Reno was down at 27. If you bring that back up, it's now back into the neighborhood there. It's roughly $40,000 per linear foot. Okay. So the next thing is construction duration. We look at this and our prediction is going to be 6 years. Alma is going to be messed up for 6 years, and people saying, I can't take that. Well, the Reno trench was constructed in 3 years, and Alameda was less than 4. And Reno, in a lot of ways, was harder. It was much longer, twice as wide, so it has a lot more excavation. It has 11 overpasses they had to deal with. They still had the groundwater constraints, just like we do. So all their construction was slowed down by making sure that everything was sealed. They were in the middle of an urban environment. They're excavating right up next to these casinos. So it wasn't like that they were in the middle of a cornfield. This was a hard excavation. And also Reno's excavation, they had these huge boulders that they had to excavate. And we likely do not have these large boulders in our clay. So I don't see anything about the Reno design that makes me think, oh, that was cheap because of this. I think it was similarly challenging. So a 6-year construction estimate for Charleston Meadows seems pretty generous, considering that we have 3 and 4 for these 2 that were built. And then let's talk about the creek interference. Is that Adobe Creek is only 1,200 feet from Charleston Road. And so your trench has to go under Charleston and then get back up and get out of the way of Charleston Road. And that's really difficult to do. There likely will be some creek interference. The question is how much? And the current design, AECOM didn't make any effort to get out of the way. And they said, well, we're gonna have a lot of interference. Let's just dam up that creek and not worry, not try and get above it, and then just pump all the water over it. Now, I'm not sure if Valley Water would approve that. It seems kind of risky to me that if you have some type of power outage and rain at the same time, which seems correlated, that you could end up having your dam just build up water. But another option would be to use either a passive or powered siphon. And at the Mitchell Park community meeting, they had a water expert there, and I talked to him for quite a while about the pump, and he was not wild about the pump. He said that no one would build that design. And this is the consultant that was supporting our meeting. It wasn't some random guy in the street. So another option would be instead, and he was much more high in siphons. He said, people do siphons, we know how to work them. They're a known quantity. Passive siphons are simpler. You just basically build a trench under it and the water flows under and back up, but they accumulate sediment. So you have to design it so that once a year you can go in there and clean up that sediment. And the nice thing is that they require no power, so you don't have to worry about power backup or anything like that. But he thought that overall active siphons were a better answer. Even though they require backup power, he said, again, that's a technology we know. We do backup power all the time. But what you're doing, you have pumps now that are pumping the water under that siphon that goes under the trench, and that will help clear up the sediment. So he says you have a lot less sediment problems when you have active siphons. And so he thought the siphon would solve the creek interference. So again, you need Valley Water, whether it's a siphon, powered siphon, or a passive siphon, or anything that we're doing at the creek, Valley Water is going to have to approve. But his opinion is that this is doable. But now suppose we do want to lessen that. Right now, if you can list it up to the first order, if you have a creek that's going through, you can go into that creek, you can enter that creek, but it's a cross-sectional area that matters. And so that cross-sectional area, you can make it wider, or since there is some elevation change from the west side of Alma to the east, you might be able to dig down and reduce that so that it's not necessarily a siphon, it's just a deeper trench that goes under. And that might be a simpler way of doing that. And even if you can't match the cross-sectional area perfectly, if you have enough area, there's some cases where the pressure increases, and then the pressure increases actually increases the velocity through, and so a reduced cross-sectional area is acceptable. Up in North Palo Alto, that's what happens at Middlefield and San Francisco Creek, is that you have a smaller opening, but because if you look at the west side of Middlefield up there, it allows the water to be held, and that increases the pressure and shoots it through, and they don't have flooding problems on the west side of Middlefield. It's all on the east side. It's downstream that they have the problems. So that would be another option, is you don't have to perfectly match that cross-sectional area. Right now, we do have a culvert that's under Alma, and that limits the flow of the creek under Alma. And so that's going to be the limiting factor. And so as long as you can be less of a limitation than that culvert under Alma, you're fine. So, and that's something that we have to work. We haven't worked that yet because AECOM's said, well, let's just keep it simple and just dam it up and pump it over. And from an analysis standpoint, that's simple. I'm not sure if that's the best answer. The other thing is that if you're trying to really stay out of the way, you really want to speed from Charleston, you want to speed that rise and get as high as you can when you hit the Adobe Creek. And so you can play with the vertical curves that you have on the rail now. And so what you really want is you want between Charleston and Adobe, you don't want to be curving up at all. You want to be at your maximum slope and just rocket up at that maximum slope. So if you can start going up beforehand so that just as you get at Charleston, you're already on the upslope, and then you're going the upslope as fast as you can. And then when you get to Adobe, if you overshoot, you will go get above the ground by a couple feet, no big deal, just level it off. And then south of Adobe Creek, you would be maybe 3 feet above, and you slowly decrease down to San Antonio. So there are some routes if you are close and you want to squeeze a little less interference out of it, you can play with the vertical curves on the rail. Again, there's also the bridge deck, just like we're talking about for the underpass. That really is critical. If you have a really thick bridge deck, that means that you have to go, the trench has to go down further. But if you can make that thinner, that bridge deck means that now that trench is up an extra foot or two, and that means you're automatically 2 feet higher when you get to Adobe Creek. So there are some options on the design of the rail bridge also. But then this last bullet is, if you can change the curvature or the slope, that's a big, big win. And so if that's something that the Caltrain study can evaluate, and even if you don't change the grade, but you change the curvature, so you can go from a flat grade to a higher grade more quickly, that really helps avoid the creek interference. So those are things that hopefully they can, if we get some relief there, this will make this problem much easier. And let's talk about groundwater leakage. The current AECOM design allows water to leak in and we just pump it up. So this is groundwater that's going from the surrounding groundwater into the trench, and then we pump it out. And that pumping lowers the water table. It depends on how pervious the creek is. If you have a high rate, you couldn't affect the groundwater significantly around the trench. The other thing is that this groundwater can't just be dumped in the storm sewer. It's groundwater and it may have some pollutants in it, and so they actually have to be treated. So that's kind of a pain. So both Reno and Alameda and also the proposed Carlsbad trenches, they all said, no, we don't want to go there. We don't want to affect our groundwater. We don't want to deal with this water that might be polluted. Let's seal it. And so all those three designs, they have sealing techniques. And this diagram on the right is from the Carlsbad feasibility study. And they looked at 8 different techniques. And they had a bunch of different things they're looking at. And if you look at the second column, that's groundwater control. And they concluded that 4 of the 8 designs, that ones with the X's, leaked too much. And so they did not want those. But they were satisfied that the 4 groundwater, 4 with the green check, had small enough leakage in it that they would not have to be pumping groundwater. And so that met their criteria on what they wanted. But still, you still will need pumps there because it's going to rain eventually, and there's no way to keep that rain unless you put a dome over the top. There's no way to keep that rain out of there. But the pumping is rather minimal. The maintenance and the operation, electricity and stuff for the rainwater this is between $4,000 to $8,000 per year. So it's not a big deal. Let's talk about groundwater flow. This is one thing that Nadia is concerned about. And a lot of people in Palo Alto worry about the groundwater. The groundwater depth around Charleston Meadows is 15, 20 feet. It varies, but it's in that neighborhood. And so we're putting a 30-foot trench in there. So it will interfere with the groundwater below it. The question is the flow of the water that is coming down from the foothill and flowing down towards the bay. If we're putting now a 30-foot trench there, we will impede the flow. But if you look at everything that's been happening in the last 5 years over at San Antonio, they have building after building, and all those have really deep foundations and parking below. They're much deeper than 30 feet. And along El Camino, we have a whole bunch of buildings where they're, again, going down further than 30 feet. So again, my lay opinion, this is just my lay opinion, is that the groundwater flow already is being constrained so that the flow is occurring deeper than 30 feet. And so I don't think that this is going to have a big effect on the groundwater flow. As long as we don't pump any of it, I think it'll be relatively low impact to the groundwater. But like I said, I'm a layperson. The trenches impact, we really do have to look at this. We have a groundwater flow and have an expert who can take measurements and do analysis and give us a real answer, not just a guess. Okay, let's talk about tiebacks. Tiebacks are bad because they go into someone's backyard, but they prevent them from planting trees, but they also prevent us from planting trees. And so if we wanted to pretty up the trench, we can't do that now because these tiebacks we're worried about the roots. And so some techniques, so the purpose is that you don't want the walls of the trench to cave in. And so here, this is from AECOM's analysis. They have these tiebacks that pull this and keep the wall from caving inward. One way you can do is you can make this a stiffer wall, a stronger wall. And so, for example, if you do a slurry wall, which has become very popular these days, that's a much stiffer wall. And so it doesn't want to cave in nearly as much. And so that would reduce the number of tiebacks you might need, or maybe the spacing of them, but you still likely would need tiebacks. But the Alameda and Carlsbad trenches couldn't use tiebacks because they had some utilities and some other things that were just next door to the trench, and they're in the same boat as we are. They're a constrained, developed area. So they instead used struts up top. And so this is the top of the trench, and you can see the rail down below. So the rail is going along the trench here, and they have struts that go across the top. And they put these struts in compression because if this is the wall, you're trying to prevent that wall from caving in. So you put it in compression so it's pushing out, and it balances out that lateral load from the soil. And they were able to build this without tiebacks. I don't know what they did at the very beginning, because this works great when the train is below, but as the train comes out, obviously the train would hit this. There'd be some options that you could make this, you could continue the wall higher as it comes out and include these. And instead of having the right here, the top of the wall is at the ground level, as the train is coming out of the trench, have that wall also rise so these struts still stay 30 feet up. Another option would be to have some type of curvature on here. The other would be towards the end, you would have perhaps some tiebacks. Another option is that, as the reason that you have to keep this from falling over is that there's 30 feet of soil here. If there's only 5 feet of soil, you likely don't need any tiebacks at all. So there'd be a spot where you might not need any tiebacks at all just because the soil forces are reduced. So the big takeaway is that struts may eliminate the need for trench tiebacks, and that simplifies all the neighbors' experience. That allows us, we could plant trees next to it and pretty it up. There'd be a lot of reasons why we'd want this, but we need, again, analysis. I'm just a lay person here. We need someone to look at the soil. The tendency for the soil to cave in depends on what kind of soil you have. And clay isn't bad because it's kind of sticky as opposed to sand, but still, they'd have to take soil samples and do their analysis and say, do they need tiebacks? Do they need struts? Could they do both? Do they do one? That's kind of analysis they'd have to do.
Yeah. So Keith, may I
Yes.
make a comment?
Sure.
One issue that may not have been discussed was earthquake protection provisions.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, this right of way is an active earthquake zone. I don't know about the others, and I'm not pretending I do.
Yeah.
Alameda is in the earthquake, in our earthquakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As is Carlsbad.
That all said, I'm pretty shocked at the numbers you came up with. I mean, I really am. I'm not just saying that. I could understand maybe if we came out as 60,000 a linear foot instead of 40, but this is, I can't express how shocked I am.
You're welcome to the club.
I'd love to talk about this. So first of all, Ripon and I are reaching out to AECOM to make sure we clarify, but I just want to state first that I'm not sure what costs exactly you have pulled from all of these, but I'd assume these are construction costs.
Now these on this page, okay, so I have two charts here. This one just talks about construction costs. This one is the total cost. This is how much Reno had to pay for the total amount. Now, but you're right in that when you talk about costs, like, well, what's included in that? And so it's kind of nebulous.
No, the reason I asked that question, and I'm sorry, maybe you're about to say this, but the Palo Alto cost without escalation, which, you know, we're escalating to a date in the future, along with the fact that there's construction management costs in here and there's right-of-way costs. So if you were to take all that out and just look at the construction cost, the construction costs are closer to this range. It's more like 400 something million. So I'm not sure if that's really what's comparable, or if you're saying that all those include all those items.
This includes all this. You know, for example, if you so this is the next page. Carlsbad has a really good document. When I look at the Carlsbad document, I want to hire the Carlsbad consultants because they seem to know what they're doing. Carlsbad has really, they know that Alameda, or in this case, San Gabriel, it's the same name, and Reno, they know both of these are successful trenches, and they've really tried to scrub and understand what they did. And in any case, this is just their construction costs. And so if you look at just the construction costs, they're all under 200. But if you look at our numbers from the fact sheet, our construction costs allocation is, drum roll please, well, we call it roadway and railroad items is one list that we have, and we're saying for the trench $450 to $540 million. So that's like double of what this is saying. And this again is just construction cost, which I think is more of an apples to apples, but it's still it's difficult because there's so many different ways of determining.
Well, and I think, Keith, you caveated it well, which is that this is just, you know, what you've been able to come up with. And we also know that AECOM did really heavy ballparks because they don't have geotechnical and they don't have some of the things. Tony, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and I'd also say that probably a lot of these estimates, or all of the estimates for all of the different alternatives, are, you know, preparing for, you know, conservative, not necessarily overly conservative completely as much as they could be, but somewhere in the ballpark, in the middle of the ballpark, it was the range that I'm sure they were aiming for. But I, you know, like many of you, I'm surprised to see these numbers. So I've asked AECOM if they can help us to understand the comparables that they used for this.
So I think AECOM can answer that question, but they've done a really beautiful cost estimate on the project. It's very well detailed and it has a lot of information.
Tony, they who, AECOM or the?
AECOM.
Okay.
This is in about maybe 8 months ago in November or September last year. September or October anyway. It's a very well done cost estimate.
Tony, I'm surprised to hear you say that because were the biggest critic of the cost numbers when we were in our committee meetings about this.
Yes, I'm still a critic of it, but here's where the critical issue is. The construction costs are very similar to what Keith is showing. It's about, my gut feel is it's around $50,000 to $60,000 per foot for the trench, but there's administrative costs that's about 2.2 times over that. I mean, 1.2 times, 2.2 times that hard construction cost number. So go over that construction report and you'll find out that they've done relative costs. They've sort of done conceptual, I don't know, comparable costs across all alternatives, and they all have that high administrative cost of about 120% or so. And that's what I was questioning, Nadia. Can we get it done without so much administration?
Gotcha. I did want to acknowledge that Dave Shen has joined the meeting, just for the record. Hi, Dave. Sorry, Keith, go ahead. Did you want to respond?
Oh, for example, if you have talk about Reno documented what they had to, how they financed this, and they list all the different financing sources. And so they're really talking big picture about this is more on the total cost, but we can go in and try to document this more from the documents I can find on the web. That's where the Carlsbad people did a good job of trying to scrub this and figuring out when they were doing their estimates what the costs would be.
And it just occurred to me, by the way, that because Keith doesn't have his camera, and he's sharing his screen, he may not be able to see if anybody has questions. So if you guys could just visually raise your hand for me, I can help get things.
I have multiple monitors, no cameras, but multiple monitors. So I have
hilarious. Well, Phil's got his hand up, and then Greg has their hand up. So
okay.
Phil, you're muted.
Yeah, okay, so this is a question for Tony. Tony, a while back, you raised the point that the AECOM overheads were significantly higher than private sector construction cost overheads.
That's correct, yes.
And so was your comment a few minutes ago speaking to that point, or is that in addition to your concern about relative private and public sector overheads?
Private sector is about 30%. If you go over 30, you're not going to produce an economical project. In this case, it's about 120%. And that was the difference. Now, if you look at their detailed costs, for instance, 1 linear foot of fence, wrought iron fence, costs $100, whereas Home Depot is about 10 or 15. Now, $100 is all costs, including supervision installed. So, but there's a discrepancy there. They've been cautious, very cautious on costs, but even on the construction costs. Yes, I think we can get them all the options down a little bit, but the administration costs is the big number. I don't know why it costs so much more in the public sector versus the private.
But these are public sector projects. So I think what Keith is trying to make the point that this is they're all in costs, not they're just construction costs. Like this is with all of that in there. Is that accurate, Keith?
That's accurate from my reading of that cost estimate.
Okay, Greg.
Yeah, the cost thing is concerning, but it's also concerning because if we're gonna do this for the trench, I mean, why don't we do this for all the options? And I think, kind of what I'm having trouble with is I think our role in the XCAP is to decide which one alternative, or I guess maybe two, are worth the city investing a bunch of money in to take to the next level of engineering. So for instance, the questions about, what kind of tiebacks you have or what kind of treatment you use for preventing groundwater intrusion. I can't imagine we can afford to do that level of engineering for everything at this stage in the process. So we're going to have to narrow things down somehow. So I don't know what my point is, but I'm not sure what to do with this information. I am, however, more concerned about the water, because to me, the water is actually the biggest downside to the trench. And I feel like, I remember asking for a long time, can we get some actual data on noise? And we did. Some people might choose not to believe it, but we did. And we spent, weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks on traffic, which nobody will ever accept because traffic is predicting human behavior. And you can always argue that someone predicted human behavior incorrectly. But I feel like we've never really gotten any actual expert to talk to us about the water. We have some FUD, and I agree it's FUD. Like, for instance, will Valley Water approve? Will the environmental people approve? What about the fish? I would really like to know whether we're going to be creating additional flood zones. because I think, you know, when 150 people come to us and say no elevated rail, it's a different question if you say, okay, your house is going to be in a flood zone then. So I would really, I don't know how we can, and I know we can't have this process go on forever. But I kind of wish that we had gotten some actual expert information about especially the creek impact of a trench, because we seem to have a lot of anecdotal conversations and we don't have like a report we can look at. So I guess I'm expressing a desire to have more information about the water, and I don't know if there's any way that via the staff or anybody we can get that.
Keith, did you have more to your presentation as well?
Yeah,
and you can feel free to respond to Greg, and then I want to make sure you got a chance to finish.
Yeah, again, this is all secondhand information, but talking to that guy at Mitchell Park, he said that you could size the siphon and have the flow, and so he didn't worry about flooding at all. He was confident that a siphon, and his preference was a powered siphon, would get the water under the trench. And so, but it'd be nice to propose that to Valley Water. That's the other thing, is we haven't proposed anything to Valley Water and get their feedback, because it's just not one person at Valley Water. They then take the application, give it to like Army Corps of Engineers and Fish and Game and other stuff. So that's something that would have been nice to have.
Yeah, it would be wonderful to have that. And unfortunately, I guess I'm tainted by our experience with Caltrain, which in 2 years of meetings, the only answer we ever got out of Caltrain is we don't have any time to give you an answer. So maybe the water bureaucracy is different. I know that there are some people in town, because I live in the part of Palo Alto that flooded in 1998, who are experts, who are experts on water and creeks, because they had to negotiate the whole San Francisco Creek mess. So I don't know if there's anybody we could invite to speak to us for half an hour about water and trenches and give us even their opinion, but I would feel a lot better, because to me, the water is really, other than the cost, which, Keith may be right. If it's a $300 million trench, that's important. On the other hand, if it's a $100 million viaduct, that'd be nice to know as well. But to me, I mean, if this runs the risk of creating new flood zones, I think that's a very hard thing to accept.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I agree totally.
For what it's worth, for those of you who are on the technical advisory committee, so Phil and Tony and myself and Keith, my recollection is that the retired civil engineers who volunteered on the project with us, their kind of gut feel, to use Tony's term, was that the raised alternatives, meaning the viaduct and the hybrid, were slightly undercosted, but that the below grades were more bloated than, however, undercosted the above grade ones, if that makes any sense to you. So just, I mean, for whatever that's worth, not technical.
And I know we all miss Roland, but he came every week for months to tell us that he could build a cheaper tunnel.
Yeah. So Keith, you said you had more slides.
So I think the only thing I had was just a summary. Let's see. So groundwater flow, leakage. Come on. Okay. The tiebacks. Yeah, just the summary chart. Is that when I look at these, I mean, this is not going to be easy, right? This is not just pull out your checkbook and pay your money. There is some engineering challenges, particularly the creek. That bothers me the most. Is can you make something that Valley Water is happy with and we're happy with too? That's hopefully that Venn diagram does have some overlap. But cost estimates, I was befuddled when I started looking at this. So I would really like to see can we bring on the people from Carlsbad or someone that did the Alameda or Reno rails, and they have firsthand knowledge, and so they could answer our questions and say, oh, your system is totally different, or no, you could do it for this amount. That probably is worth any consulting fee that we pay them to remove our uncertainty. So.
I agree with Keith on that one.
Hi, Keith, I have a question. So when you do the tieback, is it like you don't have to do shoring and then you have to excavate all of it? Like how much do you have to excavate to put the tieback like sideways like that?
That's a good question. Is that, well, if you did a tieback, at least, again, the Carlsbad had a nice explanation of how they would do it. And they would put these walls down here, and then they would put a strut and then start excavating and add struts as they go down. So I think this tieback would go in when you did that initial wall, you would probably pound that down.
Right, it's like kind of shoring, you bring it down, yeah.
I know we've asked AECOM about struts versus tiebacks, but I don't remember what happened to the answer or if they ever give us.
Right, because I'm just concerned if you do if you have to excavate further down, then you know you kind of like going in, go to the hole all the way to their backyard, right?
Yeah.
Keith, do you know what they did on the ones on? I know you and I have talked about in Menlo Park. I think it's Stanford Medical Offices that are between the whatever that hotel is, that's a third of a mile that goes by the Safeway, right? That is a deeper and definitely much wider than our right of way. And I recall how long it sort of took for them to dig that out, but I don't recall whether I saw tiebacks or struts, or are you familiar with that at all? I'm just thinking that might be...
I can explain that one.
Yeah.
What happens, as Keith pointed out, that green little line there, that's a drilled hole with an I-beam placed in it. And you do that every 10 feet or so, whatever. And then as you dig down, you add lagging between the I-beams. You start adding lagging, which is these big pieces of wood between the I sections. And you keep going down, and that structural I-beam, I-column, is strong enough to keep the dirt out without tiebacks.
And is that what they did in El Camino?
It's a lot more expensive. It's a lot more expensive than tiebacks.
Okay. But is that what you're saying, Tony, that they did along the El Camino project?
Yes, that's what they did. That's what we do when we do two-story basements.
Gotcha. I think I saw Tony with his hand up.
Point out that we had some assistance way back when from Joe Teresi, who was a retired water engineer for the city, and who wrote a very comprehensive paper for us. So he might be willing to volunteer to vet some of the things that Keith's brought to our attention on the creeks.
Yeah, so my recollection was that he knew more about the stormwater stuff, less about the underground creaky water. If that was that anybody else's recollection? Because I thought this thing was a storm. I'll look up his notes if I can. But it's a good idea, yeah. Larry. Thank you.
Yeah, but the purpose of the creeks is stormwater. Sorry.
In a different way, yeah.
Yeah, Joe talked a lot about pumping under Embarcadero or Page Mill. So he knew that. I'm not sure if he knew much about the creeks or not. I don't remember.
Mm-hmm. From a Caltrain, so here's a question. Can I pose this question differently? What are the things, so rather than, what are the things how they may have gotten this wrong? What are the assumptions that we would need to change to drive this down to a $300 million trench? Because I think we could all agree that if that was really, if that was a number we could aspire to, then the useful conversation in terms of what to ask Caltrain or things that we might talk about afterwards, it would be really good to highlight the kinds of things that we have questions about. So it sounds like the tiebacks are one, Keith. You want to run me through your list, basically? Is it your list on page 1 that is essentially the list we need to do?
You talk about what we want to talk to Caltrain about?
Right. In other words, what are the main things, what are the main cost drivers that we could, technical things that we could point to that could help drive this price down? And
for AECOM, right?
For AECOM, for council, for the Caltrain. Look, yeah. Caltrain's doing a quarter-wide study. I don't know how many other creeks there are along the 46 cities that might benefit from understanding, whatever, groundwater leaking and pumping, for example. And so if to the extent that we can think about this in a way of like, what are the drivers that can get us down to 300 million, then that might be a useful lesson.
Yeah. So, Nadia?
Yeah.
A while ago, maybe a year ago now, I looked at the whole issue of vertical curve and at the point of running some spreadsheets, and the vertical curve transition distance is what Keith was alluding to when he said we should start up the ramp to full grade earlier on. Is that correct, Keith? Am I saying?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
so go ahead.
sorry, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just the big thing, if you're trying to minimize the creek, you really want, when you're going from Charleston towards Adobe, you really want that transition to be as flat as possible, because whenever you're curving, you're not going at maximum grade.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought you meant. So when I raised this issue, let's say a year ago now, roughly, the AECOM people said, oh, you don't understand. And my calculation supposedly was wrong. But the real issue is the design speed assumption for freight versus design speed assumption for passenger, because the freight train requires a much gentler vertical curve acceleration than passenger. So what we really need to ask Caltrain is whether or not we can relax the 50-mile-an-hour design speed for freight and bring that down to 35, at which point it's the same run out distance for the transition curve as passenger, I think at 110 or something like that.
Okay, that's a super important one. So what I'm hearing you say, Phil, is that we need to ask Caltrain, can we relax the 50-mile-an-hour for UP down to 35 in one small segment, because that would allow us to potentially get looser and maybe avoid the creek altogether, which really helps. Is that right?
That's right. Now, ideally, they would apply that to all the designs, all the alternatives, but they may, even if they were unwilling to do that, they give us a variance for this one situation. Now, again, I want to stress that I doubt those freight trains are running at 50 miles an hour to begin with. And second, it's not unusual for along a freight line to have a general speed, like say 50, and to have speed limits in some local zones. And it probably would not add more than a couple of minutes of total freight runtime origin to destination, which in the world of freight trains, you don't even see that. That should be an easy one. In a rational world, of course.
Okay. So tiebacks is the second one that we could ask Caltrain about, or we would ask them to look at?
I don't know if Caltrain, well, I mean, maybe they have some thoughts about tiebacks versus struts. I guess we are putting a strut over their railroad, and do they have objections to that?
I think that's an AECOM question.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we owe AECOM to say, why is your estimate so high? And already of your other estimates equally high. But what about tiebacks versus struts? Because it's not the first time they've heard the answer.
Yeah, and there's a related issue here too, which is so-called design plate. Caltrain is assuming design plate, which essentially, if I remember correctly, again, I'm going from memory now, has to do with auto rack cars, tri-level auto racks.
Yeah.
Can't be run for other reasons. So even if we do need some kind of special treatment at the ends where the track, where the ramp up or the ramp down is only a few feet, and you couldn't use those struts, you might shorten that distance if you change the plate, the design plate.
It's the double H plate, right, Phil?
It's single H, yes, but the H
Single
plate
H
is
plate.
also the more realistic plate, given the other bridges along the right of way.
Yep, including San Francisco.
Yeah.
Nadia, I have one addition, and that is if they should do all of the cost estimates for all alternatives, because they're all a little high, but we need to do an order of magnitude comparison that's fair for each alternative.
So on that note, I just want to mention, just having Rippon's doing quick research on this, and of course we've asked AECOM to give us their information, and I'm sure we'll have information at the next meeting to share with you on this. But just looking back at the San Gabriel project, Rippon found that their cost estimate in 2011 was 500 million. And then later, I think in 2014, they found approximately $100 million of savings in their bidding or something like that. So we're talking about more than 11 years of escalation at a minimum from when the bid originally went out, just as a note. But that, of course, doesn't account for the full differences in the cost. But it's just to understand a couple different things. Number one, it really depends on bidding environment. which would of course impact all alternatives, any alternative if there's a lower, bidding environment or a higher bidding environment. But at any rate, I do want to share that we will get back with more detail from AECOM.
I'm glad we're talking about costs in California and not costs in Germany or India or anything like that.
Yeah, these are thankfully all US costs. So I'm glad you didn't pick anything in Paris.
Actually,
Love to talk about European costs.
Yeah.
Yeah, the San Gabriel project is really, really familiar to me. My wife's parents actually live right next to it, so I hear their praises of it all the time, every time I go there. And also would note that we did have, actually it was like, I believe like the first week when I came back to Palo Alto,
yes.
The gentleman from San Gabriel from Alameda Corridor East came and talked to City Council.
I'm pretty sure we have that presentation on XCAP's website under like other information or something, is the San Gabriel presentation. So you can see in there, the difference there is that it was a very long trench and they created a construction authority that actually managed the project among multiple cities that ended up really helping to drive down the costs and actually helped with the entire process, which is not unlike what Caltrain's looking at. So that's why I'd love us to focus our comments on what technical things we could point out to Caltrain or cost drivers, because that's a really important conversation and can help us when we're trying to talk to them about why it's so terrible.
That's right. So if you look at the Alameda Corridor East, the list of their projects and the cost, you can see it's a significant list of projects that Alameda Corridor East, as part of the, I guess, the San Gabriel COG completed.
Yeah.
So how do they bid those? Do they bid those individually or do they?
No, they bid them as a group. So when the gentleman came to explain to us, what he did was, so Southern California has these political structures, which I don't really understand well. Maybe Larry could explain why they've got them and we don't have them in the North, but they call them the Council of Governments. So basically multiple cities from multiple diverse areas are able to talk together in this kind of larger conglomerate and discuss things. And so the Alameda Corridor East project, if I could bore you for 2 seconds, but I promise it has a point. It builds on to an existing, the main freight yard down there is the Port of LA and the Port of, help me, what's the other one? Big one down there? Long Beach, thank you. And it's the major freight corridor and the major trade corridor. So when the trains were stopping down there, it was mostly freight trains, but you'd wait 25 minutes because the train was so long and so laden with cargo. And so what they did is they got 17 cities, I think it was, to all work together, basically figure out all their projects together. And then they went and bid those to the federal government and other places. But they had one agency that coordinated among all the cities and kind of handled all these details. It was a much more kit glove process from the city perspective, because they had one entity that negotiated everything across all the line. And that is, by the way, why when it was actually our city manager who who knew about that project, who invited them to come and speak. And we then turned that over to Sebastian Petty at Caltrain. And that actually formed the basis for what part of why Caltrain is looking at a construction authority, because they had success with this before.
If I may, if the Alameda Corridor East project was bid out in 2014, my recollection is that was a very, very favorable year for bidding construction contracts. That there was a dramatic, that was the year that Palo Alto, for example, based its major infrastructure long-term project on those costs that were available in 2014. And many of us wanted to see those projects push forward, which didn't happen because we knew those prices were favorable. The bid market for construction projects increased dramatically starting, I think, in late 2015 or into 2016. So we made a jump much greater than the cost of inflation between something that was bid out in 2014, comparing it to what's happening now in 2020.
Right, and noting that their original project, as a whole, was like $1.9 billion. That did not even include, I'd say, like 20-something million in additional costs to start up the agency and everything. So, pretty, of course, you get economy of scale a bit when you do include so many projects together.
Well, and again, that's what Caltrain's trying to capitalize on with their corridor study, right? So the more we can focus our comments to try to give those economies of scale, like this thing, Phil, that you were talking about, this operating speed. You gave me the idea, if we knew the cost of 50 miles an hour versus 35 miles an hour, then this tells Caltrain what we got to pay UP, right? We can make a deal.
That, by the way, never mind. No, forget it.
Yeah.
Dr. Seymour.
Nadia, I have
Yeah, Tony.
a suggestion for Philip, and that is the cost estimate that AECOM has is they tell us a cubic yard of concrete is $100, and they eventually come up with the total number. But then we have to go back and look at the cross section of a trench and find out how many cubic yards there are and so on, and add the pieces and components. If we can get their summary in the form that Keith has outlined, like for us, it would be a lot easier to understand how much it costs per linear foot rather than how much concrete costs. Or how much rebar costs. So,
Well, I think like what you're seeing here is, you know, Keith has calculated this by the foot, so I don't know what you'd expect to see different. I think the question is what lies in those numbers that is creating the difference.
Yes, that's what that's what we need.
I don't know that the answer is concrete.
No, it's not. No, what we need, maybe I explained this wrong. I'd like to see it in the form that Keith has shown us, which is the cost per foot, per linear foot, rather than rebar and concrete.
So,
right?
so we can certainly ask, but can we focus? I want to just go back to focusing, Keith, from your perspective. What are some other technical things that, because I really want to take some good notes on this so that we've got it. Whether or not we end up deciding to go with the trench, I really want to record for the record what are things that would have helped driven these costs down or could still.
Well, certainly, if we're talking to Caltrain, one thing, the slope and the curvature, I mean, the grade and the curvature.
Yeah.
The grade, you know, it's funny, if we were all one entity, City of Palo Alto, Caltrain, and UP, we would say, we're going to size this for the electric vehicles, and we're going to buy an extra locomotive. Like locomotives are like $2 million, right? We buy an extra locomotive for those 3 trains a day and optimize the configuration for electric vehicles.
Gotcha.
Keith, if I may say something here. May I?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'm familiar with the notion of what's called electric districts around cities, going back to the time when steam engines hauled trains and the cities wanted to ban steam engines because of smoke hazards. Typically, when you do an engine change like that, you have a crew district, as they call it, and the result is considerable expense to the railroad on an ongoing operational basis. That said, the amount of money that we might save is so huge, we might be able to capitalize that and put that saving into a capital fund, that extra cost, and the railroad would simply draw upon that in perpetuity to make themselves whole for that crew change and engine change. So we shouldn't rule it out. We just need to be aware of what we're asking.
Well, and
That makes sense? Did I explain myself well?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think I would add on that, you know, keep in mind Caltrain is doing a corridor-wide study. So there may be other places where these slopes really make a difference. And so another conversation that could end up happening is, you know, there are these diesel hybrid electric trains that, you know, part of the corridor-wide deal could be, okay, well, we agree to buy UP several of those to operate in this part of their line to be able to deal with whatever, the 2 places where the slope is more than it should be. I mean, but the more we can finesse exactly what we need from Caltrain, then they can be more creative about the solutions that they need.
Yeah, I'm actually doing some Googling to see if there are any electric freight rail operations in the United States right now. Now, California loves to pioneer electrifying things, so maybe that's something we could do. But it's an unusual thing.
Greg, the entire Northeast corridor is electric?
No, not for, it doesn't have freight trains.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that they have a separate set of tracks owned, I think, by Chessie System for freight, part of the old Penn Central.
Greg, of course, the place where they have it is the place that cannot be named, which is Europe.
Yes, well, yeah, yes. Everything is different in other parts of the world. I'm sure they have it in China too.
Okay, so I just want to go back. So Keith, what else, or any of you guys, ex-cappers, what else have you heard from Keith's technical presentation that we can think of that are things that we could highlight about driving these costs down? Let's assume our goal, for example, is to make a $300 million trench to make it sexier. What else could move? Keith, could you go to the very first slide on your presentation? Because then that had a good outline of what you just presented and will help us with ticklers. So is there anything about creek stuff that we could ask for help on? And maybe it's not Caltrain, maybe we have to ask somebody else. Does anyone have any thoughts?
Well, I mean, the construction duration is not very sexy, but you know, I'm not sure how the Alameda people save the money that Philip had mentioned, but the longer a project goes, the more expensive it is, just because the overhead of keeping everyone in. So if you can phase things more efficiently, you can save a lot of money. So I don't know if they may have been clever about how they phase things, and AECOM didn't do that, and so then we had a 6-year duration, and then if you have a 6-year duration, that's going to be very expensive compared to a 3-year duration.
Right.
So for us, I think it'll take longer because we're building it during gridlock. So it's not an easy task. We've built buildings in very heavily trafficked areas, and it takes longer.
Okay. I wondered, we don't have any estimates in our numbers about how long it takes to do the excavation, correct? I'd be curious to compare it to, for example, how long it took them to excavate the project that we're talking about on El Camino in Menlo Park. For comparison, but so construction duration and phasing is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that'd be a question for AECOM,
right?
As opposed to Caltrain. I'm not sure if we're concentrating one.
Well, the San Gabriel trench was done in a really constrained area as well, so I'd be curious at what they did. Okay, and then groundwater leaking and pumping, I think you kind of gave us an answer for that, which is really, you're saying it's the active siphons.
No, the groundwater leaking is the leaking from the ground.
Oh, sorry, that's the slurry wall, or not slurry walls, but a sealed, that was that other chart with the checks and X's.
Yeah, with the checks. And they looked at these different options.
Okay.
And this is from the Carlsbad document, but they were citing Reno and Alameda, and both those sealed it because they did the trade and said, we don't want to be pumping this thing because it's a pain to pump, and then you have to treat it.
And if I'm reading, I see the slurry diaphragm wall, which if I recall, one of our civil engineers, the retired civil that was helping us, that was his specific area of expertise. And he was saying exactly that the slurry walls are the thing, and that actually it was used by BART for their trenches.
And I believe slurry wall, Philip maybe know this, is what they used at Cal Ave for the parking structure. That's big a bathtub there. Do you know, Philip?
I'm sorry. No, I don't know.
Okay.
I'll tell you, in my opinion, we looked at a slurry wall and a normal steel columns with lagging for the project at College Terrace. And we chose not to do a slurry wall because of leak issues. And the technology is in its infancy. We didn't want to take a chance, so we did the normal steel and lagging.
I don't know, but I mean, it's what's used on the BART tunnels. I don't think it's in its infancy. I think we kind of heard the opposite. So I wonder if we may be talking about different techniques. Maybe the word slurry is used in different things.
When I say infancy, it's like 30 years old.
Oh, okay. We have different ideas of what infancy is, but that's good to know, Tony. I'm clearly a newborn. Thank you. Okay, so the groundwater leaking, and then, sorry, go back to your slide. What was the next one after that?
Just the interference with the groundwater flow.
Okay, so this is the active siphon one, right?
No, this is.
I just want to get to active siphon. Where is that?
That's in the creek interference.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Because it really, from the groundwater standpoint, the water that's underground, we interfere with it two ways. One is we put a leaky bathtub in there and we have to pump out the leaked water. And the other is that we're interfering with the flow.
Okay.
But the creek interference is now, we're preventing the water from going downstream, and we have to either pump it under or dig a hole under it or do something. And the guy at Mitchell Park, the consultant, he'd like the active siphon.
Yeah, and the issue with the creek is not every day, it's when it rains.
Right.
Yes.
And when it rains, that active siphon had better work and not be clogged. Or someone stole the wires, which happens around here.
Yeah. I was interested, Keith, what you were talking about the pumping costs, because I do see like the way our evaluation matrix is written, it says we have ongoing maintenance costs, and you think, oh God, well, we don't want to add more costs. But when they're $4,000 or $8,000 a year, I mean, that sounds like, nothing. It's like,
It becomes a little more if you have to pump the groundwater. If the groundwater is leaking in, then you continually pumping, that's a lot more.
and
But if you,
before people start sending me a million emails, I appreciate that, there's global warming and there's sea level rise, and that I know actually groundwater is coming closer to the surface. Because I did meet with the groundwater folks, so I just want to acknowledge that I do remember that. So it's possible that with the years that becomes more of an issue than it has been previously, at least from what I understood for them. But the costs that you put out there still seem more manageable than an unknown cost, which sounds scary to your fear, uncertainty, and doubt comment. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions or want to discuss? I know we haven't talked about the trench in a long time, so for me, this has been a good refresher.
Nadia, it seems to me that virtually all of the questions that Keith's analysis has raised are for AECOM to respond to. So my first thought is, are they going to do it because they really like us, or is there some problem with hiring them to spend some more time on it? And the second is, there were a few questions that seemed like they might be more directed to Caltrain, but I'm sort of reluctant to go down that path very far because of the lengthy time we've had to wait to get responses from Caltrain. And I don't know sure whether their answers are really crucial at this particular stage. I noticed that Jim Lightbody is one of the people who's participating, so maybe he would have some thoughts as to how quickly Caltrain might turn around answers to the questions that seem to be raised for them, like the 35-mile-an-hour speed limit and so forth.
Well, I think I hear what you're saying, so I'm not sure we have any more money to play with in terms of asking AECOM questions, which may be why we've got to just get very specific in our report about, where we were stuck. I'm gonna, if Mr. Lightbody wants to raise his hand, that's fine, but otherwise I'm gonna try to help him out, which is what Caltrain has said is that the things about the vertical clearances and curvature and all the technical things are among the things that should be included in the scope of this now 2-year study. So I don't think we'd get an answer because their negotiations, for example, on the curvature thing, they don't want to have to negotiate with UP about just a single intersection. They want to do corridor wide.
That's fine. I've heard that too. That's why I say it may be that we don't want to ask any questions because the delay is way beyond any deadline that we thought we had for ourselves.
Yeah, I understand.
So I just want to clarify regarding the AECOM contract that I think what's been mentioned previously is that Gary from Hexagon, his contract has been fully expended. So we don't have any money remaining in Gary's contract, but we still have some money in AECOM's contract. Was really intended to do the what's it? I'm blanking on the word.
The virtual town hall.
No, I'm sorry. The following that, the post-study report.
Project study report.
Project study report, which is to follow post. But that doesn't mean we still can't ask them questions and make sure we understand things to the extent that we can. So we will ask them these questions and see what information we can get. Now, there's a limit to how much they'll be able to do. They can't like create a new study for us or go out and do a study of the creeks or pumping or any of those kind of things, but they can tell us where their information came from and all that.
That's helpful to understand, but it makes me think that, we haven't started our discussion about the other options, but one of the ones that has the most questions is the one that wasn't quite finished, which are the underpasses. And so, I mean, as it comes to expending the whatever might remain to ask questions, we may have more questions on that one, which had the least development. I'd want to talk about that as a group.
I just want to clarify to that least development thing, because I've heard that a few times. There was a level of design that was done on all of the alternatives. And the newest alternatives were actually given more design than the previous alternatives.
Well, but we didn't have as many iterations back and forth, right? So and if you remember, when the technical committee saw the Meadow one, we didn't want to release it because we're like, well, this isn't what the original design was, and we haven't had a chance to go back and forth because we ran out of time. So I think that's what we mean by it isn't as well developed. It hasn't had as much, it hasn't benefited as much from the public input. I understand that you're saying it has enough engineering work, but different than that input.
Right. Well, I mean, the alternatives didn't exist at the same point as the other alternatives, so they can't have had the years of feedback that the other ones have had. So that's fair.
Yep.
Nadia?
Yeah.
Can we ask AECOM to translate their cost estimate into what Keith has shown, which is cost per linear foot? I think it should be pretty easy for them to do that, and if that's the first point. The second one is if you can break out construction costs separate from administrative costs, that would help us as well.
But even when we say construction costs, you have to worry like, well, if someone's watching and supervising and coordinating, is that construction cost or is that overhead?
It depends on whether the contract for the construction, like the overhead is part of construction costs. The construction company has their own overhead, which is part of construction costs.
So I think it's already separated, broken down like that on the fact sheet. I think construction costs are like 450 million approximately.
I think it's broken down really well in their cost estimates as of September 2019, that one. But if it's tedious for us to quickly understand, like Keith has shown, how much does the viaduct cost per linear foot, or how much does the trench cost per linear foot, so we can sort of look at it.
I guess this is where I'm a little bit confused. Is the sheet that Keith, if you can go to that slide, he's put in there what he is assuming the cost per linear foot is, which he's $133 to $158 per linear foot. So I'm not. I mean, if that's
an all-in cost, Tony. That takes the total price divided by the feet and gives you the amount.
Yes,
so I'm not,
that's an all-in.
So unless you're asking for a revision to their cost, that's the all-in cost per linear foot. Keith's already done this. So I guess I'm still not exactly sure what you're asking for.
I'm asking for, say, an estimate from them about how long is it, the length Keith had to get from some other source data.
So the 6,000 feet.
So you're asking for the exact measurement in feet.
Yeah, so we can do that.
Because the math is pretty easy. So sorry.
It's pretty easy.
Yeah, the way the 6,000 came from, I looked at the fact sheet and just said, well, it starts here, count how many feet, and then it's 6,000. So I just eyeballed it.
Thanks.
Yeah, so if we can get an accurate.
Actually, all the profiles, the plan and profiles have the stationing on it, and it exactly shows what the length of those trenches as well as other improvements are. So all that information is provided.
Following on at home, like here's the viaduct picture, and what Ripon is saying is this measurement down here, correct? Ripon is the one that has.
So, the information is there. We just need the.
So roughly, if you look at it, and if you're looking at only construction cost, it's about 450 to 500 million. If just looking at the construction costs and excluding the administrative and other costs that are right away and other costs at that. So 450 divided by 6,000 will be about 75 dollars per linear foot for the construction cost. Now, the construction cost definition, as Keith mentioned, may be different.
$75,000, not $75.
Yeah, I mean, it's $75,000.
Okay, just checking.
But
and I was just looking at, like if we were looking at Reno's 282,000 and giving it a 3%, just a markup on that one, it comes out to about 80% of just inflation for the engineering ENR. If you're looking at the ENR in construction cost index raising, so over the 20 years from 2005 to 2025, it's 80%. And I'm sure that was bid like 3 years in construction. So it's bid in 2001 and 2002. So it would be 80 to 90% over, just the inflation cost to address the construction cost issues. And then it comes down to, if you're looking at that, it's $282,000. So if you get $282,000 times 1.90, about $535 million in for those costs, and divided by 10,560.
So Ripon, it sounds like you have a good handle on this. Can you do them for each alternative and tell us what the cost is per linear foot?
No, I mean,
we need one.
It's not, Tony, one thing is also is that the linear foot cost may be different for different alternatives, because some cost may be,
yes, I understand.
For a viaduct, it could be longer and there is economy of scale, and then that may be altogether different. So I don't think it will be comparing apples to apples for different alternatives in per linear cost. It should be compared on the total construction cost.
And the length, the shorter the length, the shorter the cost, right? So
it all depends on the economy of scale, because the mobilization cost and certain technical and
it's not totally linear. But what I'm saying is, to Keith and Phil's point about the curvature of the tracks, if you're able to shorten the overall distance of the projects with steeper grades, then that distance does make some difference. It's not apples to apples completely, but obviously if you could cut it in half, the size wise, it would be a significant difference, right?
Correct. But if you're looking at a trench cost for on a length wise, that would be one thing. But if you're comparing different alternatives on a per linear feet, that would be not
understood.
comparing apples to apples.
Yep. Larry, I saw your hand.
Nadia, I think we're getting down into a level of detail I don't think is appropriate. I think what we ought to do is to take all the questions that Keith, I think, is quite brilliantly raised for us, send them to AECOM, ask for their opinion from AECOM and our staff, and get a report back either a week or 2 weeks from now, and then work from that, because I don't think that all of us sitting around trying to argue about some of the things we're doing is really what we've been intended to accomplish.
I agreed. I think that's super helpful. So Keith, if you want to, you can certainly send your presentation to Sarah so she can post it for everybody who's at today's meeting, and for ex-cappers. So ex-cappers, Sarah, if you're still here, if you can distribute it to ex-cappers as well, so we all get it, that would be great. But then, let's come up with the questions for AECOM.
Yeah, Keith, I'm happy to help out in this area if you need some help.
I'd like to hear if you respond what questions he thinks that we can expect answers from AECOM on.
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit, Larry. Can you say the repeat? Yep. Can you repeat your internet cut out a little bit and you froze? So if you can repeat your question.
So I would like to hear from Philip. I'd like to hear from Philip as to what questions he would take from Keith's presentation to present to AECOM to see what their responses would be.
Okay, Philip, can you answer?
Yeah, hang on. I've just got to shoo the dog out of my room.
No worries.
Can I go on a quick tangent? Is one thing we haven't talked about is 3 tracks versus 4. And I want to show a picture. Can you see this now?
Yes.
Okay, this is a picture of the Alameda. And you can notice that here again, we have the spars up top, and then we have 3 tracks. So they designed it for 3 tracks. I don't know when you scale from 3 to 4, does it break? But at least it's already halfway there, that this is not just a 2-track tunnel, it is a 3-track tunnel.
With double stack containers in it.
Yep, there's your H-plate answer, Phil.
So I'm sorry, coming back to Larry's question, thanks for that. I think, we've already asked them for, information about the cost estimates. I'm a little bit still confused about Tony's question. I guess he just wants the length of what the cost estimate wanted, or determined.
It's pretty simple. Maybe I'm not explaining it well. You see that last column that in Keith's slide right up there?
Yeah.
You just need the cost per linear foot for each alternative.
But those are the costs for linear foot, Tony.
Yeah,
No,
those
not-
are. So that's why I'm confused.
Oh, I see what he's saying. Tony is saying he wants to see it. Keith calculated for the trench. He wants it for a viaduct and a hybrid and an underpass.
Oh,
Yes, thank you, Nadia.
I get it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Got it.
yeah.
Okay.
It's
Okay. I'm
each
so
one
sorry.
because they're all comparable in AECOM's view. I mean,
Okay.
they're
Well,
order of
at any rate,
magnitude costs.
what we're asking AECOM is for clarification, comparables that they use, because I'm sure they have comparables for their different cost estimates. I'm
Sure,
sure
yeah.
they've also looked at these costs or similar ones. I know specifically the San Gabriel one we've talked about. So I'm curious about that. And I guess, I'm open to hearing what other questions that, XCAP would like. We actually sent them this whole presentation. So
I think if I could start, a reasonable question would be, what assumptions would you have to change to get closer to 300 million? Like, which assumptions does AECOM think help drive the cost down?
Yep.
Because we've never really asked in all of this, like, hey, so you gave us your number. We don't love it. Could you help us? Right? Like, we've never really said, okay, what is really complicating these things? And I think that would be super useful for us to understand.
Right, like if they were to say, oh, you don't realize that the kind of soil in Palo Alto or the someone made an offhand comment to me at a meeting about 200,000 dump trucks full of soil or something like that. So, those are the kinds of things like Tony mentioned, traffic. Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. So are we clear? So that's one question for me. So Tony wants the linear feet for each of the different alternatives. I'd like to know what AECOM thinks that is reasonable to help drive down the numbers on this particular alternative. I mean, all of them generally, but I think the trench is clearly the favorite, at least if we count the number of commenters we've had. Keith, is there anything else that we specifically want to highlight that hasn't been said so we can make sure we're getting your...
Well, I mean, I agree with Greg that one of my concerns is the creek, but I don't think, that would be more analysis. And so it's not a quick question.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly my thoughts. And yeah, it's really not something that is likely to come at this early stage in development. So
But it'd be nice to get an opinion from an actual expert on the record. Doesn't have to be AECOM, doesn't have to be engineering. Just like we have a traffic report and we have a noise report and we have renderings and we have designs and we have construction estimates, and on creeks we have sort of conversations we've all had.
So I think given the budget constraints, part of what we're going to have to include in our report is going to be a paragraph that addresses future needs. Like if the council was going to look at a trench, then this is a big gaping hole in our analysis and we need geotechnical work and we need creek stuff, which was not going to be a newsflash, but I think it needs to be said.
Nadia, Philip, I just want to make clear, you sent all of Keith's analysis to AECOM?
I believe Ripon has sent this entire presentation. Ripon, maybe you can confirm.
Yeah, no, we will be forwarding. I've snipped a few pictures from the the presentation and then sent them right away. But as we get the presentation in hand, we can forward the complete presentation to them.
Yeah, I'll send you a new copy right after the presentation.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
So I think my request to them would be along the lines of the chart that's on the screen right now, but might have. Glad to hear them.
Yeah, you broke up just a little bit at least on my end, but just to note that I did send them a picture of this. This was the first thing as we were going through the presentation. I sent them this very screen and asked the question about it, and then Ripon followed up with a few other pictures from other slides.
So can I ask a question? All right, we're 2 hours into what I think is a 3-hour meeting.
Yes.
If we're putting together a list of information we'd like in order to make a better decision, I actually have a few other requests. So before the meeting's over, I'd love to have an opportunity to make them.
Sure. I was thinking if everyone's okay, I'd love to take a 5-minute break so that everyone can stretch their legs just a little bit. And then maybe, Greg, if I have no problem, if you want to start with your list of questions. And then maybe we can use the matrix to capture those questions. Maybe that's a good way to try to do this. I see Carrie nodding like,
because
yes,
I assume
please.
you want to do it, you're going around the table with the pros and cons like we did last time.
Yes.
And we might have to do that quickly.
My 9 pages of notebook notes is not going to cut it. So it would be good to be able to kind of capture this stuff. And so, okay.
And do we also, Nadia, perhaps when we get back from the break, thank you for that. Do we want to have a chance to interact with like to go around and talk about what Keith presented? Or
yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, so let's take a break and then we'll come back, and if there's anybody else who wants to respond to what kind of Keith has come up with, then that'd be awesome. All right, everybody take 5. It's 6:05, maybe 6:11. You get an extra minute. Okay, I'm gonna give one more minute. And X-Cappers, if you're back, just let me know. I guess, Keith, if you can unmute yourself when you're back, that's the only way that I know you're alive. If you hear this. Okay, so I wanted to give everyone a chance to respond to Keith's presentation and kind of give your thoughts. I guess it's probably a good time to just hear from everybody and just wait, make sure Keith is back. And Carrie. Keith and Carrie, when you're back, let us know. Okay, well, while we wait for Keith and Carrie, well, I kind of want Keith to be here because we're responding to his presentation. So I'm just going to wait another minute. Keith, are you here? It doesn't show that he's muted anymore. Oh, are you there? Keith? Is anybody else here, Keith? I see he's not muted, but I don't hear him. I see you, Philip.
I heard a distant hello, but
yeah, me too. And then I feel like Keith fell into a trench, maybe. That's terrible.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, and Young, I think you're muted now.
Okay, I had to log back in because somehow I couldn't hear anything. So.
Oh, okay. Maybe Keith's having the same problem. Keith, can you hear us now? And Carrie? Huh. That's strange. Let me try texting Keith and see if she's getting. Sorry, everybody. This is life in Zoom. I appreciate your patience. Keith, can you talk? Because we see that you're unmuted, but I don't hear you. Yeah, if you're talking, we're not hearing you. I can see that it shows that you're not muted, but we also cannot hear you. Maybe your headphones fell out? I'm getting the endless 3 dots as he's texting. Maybe computer is having an issue is what he says. Okay. Oh, I can see him.
Yep. Well, now we've got his MATLAB. Okay,
Yeah,
he's exiting
exactly.
his MATLAB.
You can see your computer screen. Philip, can you, or who's hosting? Sarah, if you're hosting, could you stop Keith's sharing? Or let me see if I share screen for a second. That might work.
Well, that worked. I was going to say, I can't stop him.
Okay.
There are Or Ripon maybe possibly. too.
All right, I at least knocked him off of that so that
Right.
we're not all watching Keith try to exit his work laptop. Let's see. Okay, I stopped your screen share. And Carrie, is Carrie back? Because I wonder if something happened. Because In-Young, you said you had to dial back in.
Yeah, I couldn't hear anything, so I'd logged out and
Okay,
logged back in.
let me ask Carrie. Any suggestions, staff, on what I could be doing? I'm texting Carrie and seeing if she's having trouble.
Hi, Nadia. It's Sarah.
Hi.
I could remove Carrie and then just have her go back and rejoin.
Okay, it looks like Keith removed himself, so maybe he'll be coming back. And Carrie, I'm waiting for her to respond. Keith at least was responding. I'm not getting Carrie on the phone
Okay.
or on the text.
Teach us to take breaks.
Yes,
No stopping allowed.
exactly. Well, and I hate to continue just because Keith spent so much time in his presentation that I would like for him to hear everybody's feedback.
Right.
Anybody else have any ideas? Oh, there's Carrie.
Okay.
Yay. Okay.
And I'll resend Keith the panelist invite.
Invite. Okay, I'll let him know. Carrie, did you have computer trouble? Because Keith had some audio issues and had to leave.
Yeah, no, it was user error.
No worries. Okay,
I forgot
that's
to
totally.
turn my camera back on. I'm like, why don't I hear anything? Oh,
That's fine. Looks
Yeah.
like Keith is rejoining us. Keith, can you hear us now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, a little low. If you could go more closer to the
Hello?
microphone. Yeah, that's better. Yay. Okay. I know you all did this just for an extra long break, so good for you.
you caught us.
Exactly. People will do just about anything these days. Okay, so Carrie, since it was you were saying that you'd like to respond or react to some of these things, I'll let you lead, but I wanted to wait for Keith to get here, so I'm glad you all made it back.
Yeah, so I just wanted to comment about the assumption that the primary objection to the trench was the price. That was not my primary objection, and you did end up speaking to it later, but just to share with you that I'm very concerned about the safety regarding the redirection of the creeks and the flooding concerns, and that seems like a big blocker for me. So I'll be interested to see and hear more about the questions you asked regarding the safety and if what is really the scope of the concern. But I also asked the water expert at that same meeting, and I came away with oh my goodness, it's pretty risky for things like utilities like this. My risk tolerance is much lower. So I just wanted to share that with you because it was an important assumption that you made during your presentation, and I'm not sure that's entirely accurate for all of us.
Okay. Anybody else? In-Young? I'm just going in order on my screen.
Yeah,
so.
sure. Yeah, I think Carrie brought out good point, and but still, I guess we're discussing this under, in case trench is chosen, right? So I think it's worth discussing. The reason I didn't like the trench was the buildability, you know, disrupting a lots of neighborhood, like excavating and, you know, duration of construction and all that. So, and also like it's dangerous, you can fall down and etc. So
It'll have a fence, you know.
Yeah. But
I didn't want to leave anybody watching with the impression that they're just making a big hole and there's nothing around it. And I also realize it's a very long meeting and maybe that was very obvious. So I apologize if I just said something really dumb.
I think it's, you know, you can make it then, you know, like just looking at the trench, I'm just like, you know, children's jumping down, you know, high school pressure and all that. So that's what I'm thinking, that, you know, they can hop up the fence. But anyway, so yeah, I'm not favorable with trench, but there isn't much alternatives, and, you know, neighborhood consensus, some people still think it's trench is better. And, you know, my biggest, you know, I don't want to say this, but I'm going to say it because everybody's going to yell at me, but, you know, Churchill, Meadow, any of these proposed choices, there is always, nothing is perfect, right? I think seems to me like perfect is tunnel, but we roll it out. So, you know, it's just very hard choice.
Okay. Dave, you're my next square.
Well, a little bit disadvantaged walking in late.
It's okay. There's no gotchas here. We're just talking trenches. It's been a while, so feel free to start wherever you want.
Yeah, only that besides walking in late, I came into this meeting really, I don't know, just not feeling good in general, in the sense that I did not feel there was a really good alternative to pick from. So that's all I just wanted to say. I mean, I generally am not a eminent domain or a property taking person. So what does that leave us with? The tunnel or the trench, at least in its current incarnation, and of the other options that we have on the table. So I really don't have anything else to say at this juncture besides that. Thanks.
Thanks. Sorry, Dave, could I just ask you, so Carrie expressed that her bigger issue was water. Was yours more water? Was it more price? Was it more safety? Could you talk a little bit more about kind of what your, like, you know, what's a stopper for you on this, or what's a go for you on this, or kind of what makes you pause?
Yeah, water, 4 tracks versus 2. I'm less concerned about safety, but cost, man. I think we really need to get a handle on that at some. Do we have the right order of magnitude sitting there, or are we completely off? It'd be nice to know that.
Okay. Larry, I've got you next in my squares.
Well, let me use this opportunity to say something I've been meaning to say. It's really to the public, not to this group. We've gotten so many messages that say cost shouldn't be a factor, that this is going to last 100 years and so forth. That almost says that we're being talked to as if we were parents controlling the bankroll for the teenager who wants to buy a new car. We're just being nasty and not being willing to spend the money. We don't have, this committee doesn't have the money. The city council doesn't have the money that we're talking about. We're going to be asking either regional governments, federal government, or our voters ultimately for the money for any of these alternatives. And you just got to be realistic that if we're asking our neighbors in Palo Alto for the money, you've got to present a good case to the neighbors, the 95% of Palo Altans who don't live in those 2 neighborhoods affected by Charleston and Meadow, that it's money that they should spend. This, regardless of whether you adopt Keith's numbers or somebody else's numbers, we're going to be asking for probably unless we get money from somewhere else, for an amount in infrastructure bonds more than equal to all of our previous infrastructure spendings in Palo Alto. So this is a big deal, and we've got to make it very, very good case that this is that the recommendation makes sense financially, and that we're not overspending, or that this really makes sense for the entire community, not just for one particular neighborhood. That said, I'm very interested in what Keith produced, because it could lead me to change my mind as to whether I think that the trench is a viable alternative. In addition to the dollars, the other concern I have that Keith raised, which we haven't talked very much about, but what I want to emphasize, is the length of construction. 6 years is a daunting number to me. If that can be brought down by 50%, whatever that to me might be a game changer. 6 years, I think, would really be a devastating hurt to our entire community. So I hopefully get a positive response from AECOM so that I can really believe in Keith's estimate rather than AECOM's present estimate. So I'm very interested in what we hear back from them.
Right. Greg?
Yeah, I'm done.
I had a lot of chances to talk before. I do want to ask some other questions for additional information, but I can wait to do that.
Oh yeah, if you can hold that, we'll come back on that one. Tony and then Phil.
So firstly, I want to thank Keith. This is the kind of analysis that we should be really proud of, and we should keep going with. The idea of comparing other alternatives in this kind of detail, for instance, the detail that Keith has shown us about other places and the costs and benefits of other places, is really valuable, and it would be great to have that kind of analysis done for the other alternatives. Regarding the trench, this is, since 10 years, has been my second to best alternative. The tunnel was #1, and I couldn't understand how we could spend that much money on a tunnel. And I think the downside about the trench is that same problem about the cost. If we can keep going on this cost and drill it down and make them apples to apples, in other words, the conceptual costs on all of them should be looked at a little bit more carefully. That would be great, but the costs bother me, and the time of duration of construction during gridlock is very hard for me to understand. I don't know how we can do a trench even for 3 years during gridlock. It's really difficult. So.
Okay. Phil, you're up. Oh, I think Phil's talking offline. Phil? Well, Phil's talking. I'll say my thing. So, I'm similar to where you guys are. I think I recognize that these numbers are very ballpark, and I really would like to work on value engineering is not the word, but really figuring out what the cost drivers are and asking AECOM to be more of a partner in helping us problem solve where our designs are making these things. Curvature of the, UP's freight speeds or whatever, all of those things I think would be super helpful. I do have concerns about the water issue. It is a big unknown that unfortunately we don't have money and we aren't able to get a study on before we've got to make these decisions. And that's something that I personally am really struggling with, because I do hear that is what everybody wants. Or the preferred alternative in terms of folks who that we heard from. I did want to differ with what Larry said a little bit. I don't think of this in terms of what we're going to ask Palo Altans for infrastructure bonds, because all the research that I've done on the costing of these projects is that there's typically a local match, and that's usually what our Measure B dollars would be put towards. And then there's kind of a tapestry of funding that comes from other places. So it's not like we Palo Altans will necessarily be the ones that have to ultimately come up with the entire rest of the money. That said, you know, these are still big numbers, and we may need to put more into the pot, and so that could change. And so the costs and the water issue, the two things that for me have made the discussion about the trench really difficult. I'd like to talk about the 4-track issue at some other point, because I think that's an issue I have with just generally, but that's mine. I see that Phil has his headphones back on. Phil, we were calling on you, but I think you were talking, so I went instead, so you get the last word.
I apologize, but I have
No worries.
But I did have to set up some dinner planning.
You got to put your mic a little closer because we can't hear you.
I was talking about dinner planning.
That's always allowed. Happens at my house too, believe it or not. So Phil, did you have any reactions to Keith's presentation?
Well,
thoughts on
I
the
already
trench?
gave them earlier. I feel gobsmacked by the numbers. That's the word I think I would choose to use.
Okay.
But I think it's great. It's great work. I mean, and if Keith needs any more, I feel like given my background, I should support him on that.
Do you, if you had hesitations about the trench, or if it's your favorite, kind of what are the things that are there for you?
Oh, well, to me, the main issue around the trench was the sheer cost and construction time. And we've already discussed those issues. Take those issues, mitigate them significantly. And I think the trench is definitely up and running. I still feel I'll just say I still have very negative feelings around the viaduct.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay. All right. I think, Greg, you said you had some, if we're thinking about, and actually I wanted to go to the matrix, but I think I'm thinking about if we want to get more information and there's some easy questions that AECOM could answer and we could think about those for other alternatives, it would be good to get those in today so that we have time to get those for upcoming meetings before we finish deliberations. So if it's okay with everybody, if there's other things that we'd like to know more about the other ideas, then that would be, or about the other alternatives, and now would be the time to throw those out. And Greg, it sounds like you've got a hot list, so I'm all ears.
Yeah, so I'll give a few, maybe others have them.
And actually, sorry, pause. Is there a way to capture this in the matrix, or should I just take old-fashioned notes?
I don't know if this is a matrix thing.
Okay, all right, I'll take notes. And
I think these might end up being questions for Philip, not Phil Burton, Philip Kempe, and Rippon.
Okay.
One is about, I am not plugged into everything in Palo Alto, but the Loma Verde bicycle project. This is last week was the first I'd heard of that. One of the advantages I had seen for the viaduct was that it might be possible to cross under the viaduct on foot or on a bicycle, but I had concluded that there really wasn't anywhere to go between Meadow and Charleston. So I'd love to learn more about this Loma Verde proposed overcrossing and where it would be. Because if there was like an opportunity, if we end up having to choose an elevated option, I recognize there will be a very emotional reaction from many of the people who come to our meetings occasionally. But it would be more positive if we could give people some recreational opportunities. So I don't know if anyone's could just send like here's the doc on the proposed Loma Verde undercrossing. I would love to know more about it. Or if it's not an undercrossing, what is it?
Yeah, there's a Matadero. What was the name of that thing that you sent me, Philip? It was called the Matadero something or another. It was referenced by Carrie Wagner in public comment too. It was
Midtown Connector.
The Midtown Connector. Yeah.
Midtown Connector, and there was a feasibility study, I believe, in 20.
I'll Google it. Okay.
Yeah, I can send something out to the XCAP and maybe.
It's also in the bike and ped plan, the 2012 bike and ped plan.
Okay, cool.
If I remember correctly, it got over the tracks and got over almost in an overpass, a bicycle ped.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and actually I can share my screen so you guys can see.
So
what
it's not
I'm
like we're
seeing.
using creek right of way for a bicycle underpass like we do in some parts of town, right?
I think it's, I think it's I don't know enough about it, but just to give everyone the general concept. So this is Loma Verde. Hopefully you can see my mouse here. This is Loma Verde here. And so it's a pretty straight line from Midtown basically this way. This is Fry's over here.
Yep.
And a question about how it connects in this area over. And then, but it could, is it Matadero Avenue, Keith? Do you remember which is the one that kind of connects to, there's a bike path here somewhere. The creek actually makes the turn here. This thing right here is the creek.
Right.
You see that S curve? And actually, if we zoom in, this is the Fry's parking lot. Creek goes like this, and you see the creek actually turns here.
Yep.
And then it actually comes out on the other side. So we've been using the words Loma Verde, but it's really kind of in the vicinity. There's kind of El Carmelo and Loma Verde. And Loma Verde is just a bigger street. And so what it ties to is a bike path that leads basically all the way down to VMware. So it's a really important crosstown connector.
And done as well.
Yes, exactly. Now what it, part of the reason initially that we moved it from NBCAP was, number one, for those who don't know, this is the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan section that's over here. So it kind of made sense for what they were doing in terms of how to connect and thinking about building new housing and where those kids would go to school and what schools they'd commute to. But another thing is that Meadow and Charleston are over here. And so the conundrum during construction is where else do you, similar, we were talking about building seal to be able to mitigate construction. Where else do you do that? I should point out that I had two different bike folks talk to me about El Verano as a place, but of course there's two apartment buildings here. And so that is kind of a little tough. And then somebody pointed out that, see, between Meadow and Charleston, part of if you had a viaduct, obviously we're talking about trying to make east-west connectors.
Right.
Part of the challenge is you have the Circles neighborhood.
Yes.
And there isn't a straight shot. Someone did point out that Lindero Drive has this kind of interesting triangle, which seems to be a little bit more space than you normally would have, but it's still tough. There's nothing on the other side. And there was a question of, could you have something pop all the way under Robles Park? But that means tunneling under Alma, the tracks, and people's homes. So at this point, it reminds me of the 1980s Dig Dug. You know what I mean? Like we could go far, but so those are when people are talking about trying to look at other creative places, those are, this may still be a good mitigation. Having something in this general vicinity could be a good mitigation for construction. But these connections are obviously still important. And it's something I've heard repeatedly, here's Oregon Expressway, here's San Antonio, and the complaint is, well, North Palo Alto has a lot more places to cross. Yes, but it's also just kind of the way the streets go. There aren't as many natural connections as there are as you get further north. And
Right,
so
unless someone wants to
unfortunate
donate their home for a bike trail, yes.
Right, yeah, exactly. And so, it's a real question. I mean, because of Prop 13, as we heard, something that's come up a lot is about the eminent domain. One of the things that we learned is that because of Prop 13, for some people being able to negotiate with the city to sell your property to the city to be able to give some of these public right-of-ways is not an unattractive option, right? So, but it's something that may or may not be for everybody. And I don't mean to say that I don't want to be flip and say that it's an easy thing.
Yeah.
But that was kind of the concept on that. I can send the mid connector thing that Philip sent to me.
I can see the website. Okay. So I think I have what I needed to know about this. I'm going to ask a few more questions.
Sure. Awesome.
Actually, one is sort of a general XCAP question. We seem to be kind of paralyzed by the 4-track issue, and the council had a lot of questions Tuesday night or whenever that was, maybe that was Monday night, about the 4-track issue.
Yep.
Is there any way that someone on the XCAP who is good at the technical stuff like Phil could map a potential 4-track passing area onto a map of Palo Alto and see if there's anywhere we could put it that doesn't overlap with a tunnel or trench or hybrid? I know there's some parts of Palo Alto where the right-of-way is a little wider. I know over by where you were just showing, there is a siding.
Well, so the challenge is actually it has to be about 3 miles long. So what Caltrain has basically expressed is they've taken a conservative view, and just to zoom out, they're going from the San Francisco Creek, which is over here, all the way down to, I believe it's in Mountain View, and I don't remember which, it might be Rengstorff, might be a little bit further down, maybe Shoreline. And so basically when you plop down 3 tracks, and if you count that probably it doesn't fit at Churchill, the area you're left with is essentially from south of Oregon Expressway down. And this from here to here is more is less than 3 miles. So
Okay.
it basically runs the entire length of the
So the
south.
answer is, yeah, forget it. Okay.
Right.
Well, I think the answer really is Caltrain might have to acquire some some land via its own eminent domain.
No, they don't need any land. So the 4 tracks fits, the right of way here is between 100 to 150 feet, the entire length of the right of way from the CalAb station all the way to the Mountain View border.
But Nadia, did I misunderstand you when you said that the right of way with sufficient width is not the 3 miles they need?
No, what I said is the place where it may not fit is Churchill. So right now they've taken an extremely conservative position and just said, well, basically all of Palo Alto and part of Mountain View, we're going to assume is 4 tracks. And as Sebastian said at our meeting, there could be some additional work to basically decide if they could rule out Churchill specifically, but it does not, there's still a question about South Palo Alto.
Yeah, well, in the Caltrain documents I've seen, they're pretty flexible as to the exact siting of that 4-track section of railroad.
But they're clear it has to be about 3 miles. Isn't that what you saw?
The only point is that it could be you could take that 3 mile zone and kind of slide it up and down the Carter to make it fit within the existing.
But the really isn't, as Nadia's pointing out, I was imagining it was much smaller. So if it's really 3 miles, then there really isn't, and I know you can do that on Google Maps. There really isn't anything.
Yeah, that's 3 miles, just to be clear.
So it's basically all of Palo Alto. Okay.
All of South Palo Alto, yes. If they focus on the south, right?
What fun. Okay.
Yeah, and because I have concerns about that as well, and so in the beginning when we started this process, we knew that this was something that was sort of hanging out there because it's been something that has been part of what High Speed Rail and Caltrain have discussed previously, but no action had been taken, and frankly, times were booming. And to me, it was conceivable that Palo Alto could kind of forge ahead with a 2-track alternative and then go and negotiate and say, hey, we've got our 2-track plan, we're moving ahead, unless you can prove otherwise that High Speed Rail is coming and or this is what we want to do. And that was kind of why I was okay with the idea that we went down this path of looking at alternatives that only had 2 tracks. I think what changed for me was Sebastian Petty first came to us, that we first saw those emails in April. And that was like, wait, when did you decide this? And I went back and looked today. They actually, the issue of 4 tracks went to the Caltrain board in January and was approved in February. And somehow nobody caught it. I mean, we were all pretty busy, so it's not our fault. And so by April, it became clear that not only had the board taken a specific position, but that they had also taken a more conservative position than what we had imagined, where they now were deciding that they didn't want to encumber any land at Churchill either, right? And that impacts obviously, or at least from what I heard, impacted some of the choices about Churchill. And so now what I'm sort of stuck with is I'm someone who's worked on high-speed rail for a long time. I personally don't believe that high-speed rail is coming anytime soon. We've got a really long ways for, not the least of which is they don't have money. But what I'm learning and appreciating more and more the longer I've been doing this is that once you give up your right-of-way, you don't get it back. Yeah. And so land banking in the railroad industry is a serious thing. It's something UP has done forever. I'm sure Phil can tell us stories about that. And so
they don't like to abandon lines if they don't have to, but when they do, they do.
Right, and that you pay a price for it, right? So in this case, unless and until, right now, Caltrain's in a situation where they basically have been getting money from High Speed Rail. It's how they got their electrification money. And there's a possibility that as High Speed Rail dies, if you believe that they're going to die, at some point, some of that money might get split up. And so more money might come to different train sections in the north or in the south. What that tells me is that Caltrain isn't going to do anything to piss off High Speed Rail, in my opinion. Until they're sure they've gotten every red penny they can get. And so they're going to continue with this very conservative stance. And the other reason I think this is going to be something that will be a problem for a long time is that I've been following this for a long time, and there are places where grade separations matter to Caltrain and others where there's something that they're going to have to deal with, but don't impact their operations. And Palo Alto's grade separations, as hard as they are not really high up on the list of grade separations that help Caltrain with their operations. So they're not really, when they have to think about ordering which ones go first and which ones go second, it's true that because we've got potentially Measure B funding that pushes us further up into the line, but they're not necessarily rushing to give us an answer. And unfortunately, in this case, this presents a real opportunity for Mountain View and Sunnyvale, because the alternatives that they're considering don't move the train tracks. And so it's irrelevant to them whether there's 4 tracks or 2. They don't care. In our alternatives, currently, the only South Palo Alto alternative that would not be impacted by 4 tracks is the underpass, which has not gotten the level of review, I would say. And so that's what I'm bothered by. And more and more to me, as I think about, okay, well, what are my choices? Well, my choices are very different if I have to think about a 4-track versus if I have to think about a 2-track.
Okay. So the answer is there's no easy answer to this. Okay.
I mean, that's just where I am. Larry, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
I'm going to keep asking technical questions, though. I'm going to ask for one more.
Okay.
Can we ask AECOM, since we want to talk, I think we're going to deliberate all the alternatives. Can we ask AECOM what the possibility is for sound walls on the hybrid option, and whether that is an extremely complex choice? The reason is we have a sound analysis, we have a noise analysis, and every single email we get about the elevated options says, don't pick the elevated options because we believe that they'll be noisier. We also have a noise study that doesn't say that, by the way. But the noise study assumed that the viaduct had sound walls, and I think it might have assumed that the hybrid did not. Do we want to even explore that possibility?
I think I'd like to get clarification. So if we could ask staff if they could verify whether the noise study, and it might be in there, we just might need to read it more closely, but whether the viaduct and the hybrid were both assumed to have the noise walls, the sound parapet, I think it was called, or whether only one did and the other one didn't. Is that
the rendering, the renderings for the viaduct show sound walls, and the renderings for the hybrid do not. Okay. And the partial underpass for that matter.
But yeah, we can get back to you.
Yeah.
Great, awesome.
And at some point I want to talk about money, but I think we're out of time. So.
Sure. Larry, you had a comment, and then I want to go back to technical questions that we want to know about. Sure.
Well, I wanted to give you my take on the high-speed rail, which is more from a political angle than what Nadia was talking about. But I don't necessarily disagree with what she's saying. But as one who had a lead role in Palo Alto's opposing high-speed rail 8-9 years ago now, and who helped organize a statewide coalition against high-speed rail, I think, and it was followed from a political standpoint ever since. I think the likelihood of high-speed rail coming through the peninsula in the next 30 or 40 years is slim to none. My guess is, particularly after COVID-19 and the budget problems that California has, that we're going to see in the next year or so that the governor has to pull the plug on the rest of high-speed rail because it just doesn't make sense. There's a reporter out of the LA Times who's been doing a series of exposés on high-speed rail for years, and he just had a devastating one come out about 2 or 3 weeks ago, pointing out all of their deficiencies, overruns, and so forth, and saying, is this ever going to work? And his answer is no. So the lesson I get out of that for us is that we should proceed on the basis that we've been going. We don't have to account for a 4-lane situation anywhere in the areas that we're studying. And keeping in mind that what we are going to recommend isn't going to be implemented tomorrow or next week or even next year, that there's plenty of time for it to necessity to be worked out, and that it doesn't make any sense for us to be worried about where a 4-track might go, given where we've been. And we've been studying all this. We've spent, I don't know how much we've spent on our consultant for a series of 2-track alternatives. And to me, that makes sense, because I think that is, with a high degree of probability, what our community is going to have for really for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, Tony.
So I sort of have a follow-up question to Larry and to you, Nadia.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Smidian had made a compromise or put into some kind of agreement that there will be only 2 tracks through Palo Alto. And I don't know how that can be violated, but apparently
yes, it was a mostly 2-track system. So the original high-speed rail plan was that they would have 4 tracks, the entire length from San Francisco all the way to San Jose. And when CARD took their concerns about, that they don't actually need 4 tracks the entire way, they just needed passing tracks in set areas, they negotiating a deal which was signed in 2012, which is the blended agreement. And so that is where they decided that they would have passing tracks in specific areas. And so it's exactly that agreement, which is why Caltrain is taking this position, because what happened is they did this exercise where they asked Caltrain to give a fictitious schedule. And Caltrain threw out a schedule that only had 6 trains an hour, which didn't allow for any Caltrain growth. And so High Speed Rail has been using that to assume that, oh, well, then Caltrain can move over to the side and we don't need passing tracks, we'll head on through. And Caltrain is saying, no, you can't make us wait. We are the ones who own this right away. You have to build your own passing tracks because we're going to head on through. And this is the fight that's happening now in the EIR. So I don't disagree with Larry. I agree that I don't think High Speed Rail is happening, but the thing is that it doesn't matter what we think. It only matters what Caltrain feels like they need to plan for. And I think the political pressure for at least a certain amount of time is going to be that we are stuck with the possibility of 4 tracks because of the board action that's been taken, and that this is going to hang around for a long while until this dies. Now, if Larry's right and it dies really fast, great, but that doesn't take away the fact that MTC and other, the state rail plan is looking to keep the land banked, right, for other things. So maybe high-speed rail dies, but maybe some new form of some other rail, the Dumbarton Rail comes along and they need passing tracks. And so the idea that they're necessarily going to give up that right away is what I'm concerned about. And I've grown less and less confident in that personally. I did have a technical question that I had is, so Philip, when with the underpass alternative, of course we had the jacked box conversation, but AECOM's plans look at shoe fly tracks. So a question is, what if they already are building shoe fly tracks, if we raise the tracks a foot or 2, is that technically possible given the situation that they forecasted in their type of engineering?
I think the option to raise it is a possibility. I think the question that would be outstanding in that is how much it costs to do that. But I don't think that's something that would be impossible.
So, because I think then it would be helpful to understand if they could give us a ballpark of by how much before you start to have to build structure. So if you could get a foot or 2, when we're talking about the percent grade that the bikers are really concerned about, every foot or 2 really makes a difference. And so the combination of a thinner rail bridge and being able to lift the tracks a foot or 2 could really make all the difference for some of these bike ped connections. And so
yeah, I'd asked AECOM about that about a week ago, so I'll see what, or 2 weeks ago, see what information we can get back.
Okay, great. Anybody else have any questions that they thought technically would be useful to understand for the upcoming alternatives?
No, yes, I think the idea of where that viaduct might be placed exactly within a foot would be valuable, because we need to know what that impact is on the backyards of the people that front the 50 people or so, 50 houses or so that front or back onto that track. And I'm asking this because we have a code in Palo Alto called the daylight plane. And my imagination, and I don't know exactly where these tracks or the viaducts are going to get placed, but if the daylight plane that we have already established in our zoning ordinance is within that track height, then I'm much more comfortable with the viaduct than otherwise. Now, that said, I'm sort of happy that you, Nadia, is saying that it's unlikely that high-speed rail will come by, but if it's a 2-track viaduct, I'm also much more comfortable than a 4-track. A 4-track viaduct for me is unacceptable. It's just the geometry of light doesn't work to get down into the middle, and bad stuff happens when it gets dark even in the day. So that said about the viaduct, the information that we'd like to know from AECOM would be a more detailed section of what those backyards look like and how far is the track from those backyards and how high. And then we have options to see if landscaping helps but it influences neighbors as well as us in our decision making. Shall I talk about the other alternative, the underpass? I think the underpass, this is Elizabeth's version. I think it has tremendous potential. It's an idea for me that could be the most beautiful of all of these alternatives. But it's an idea that needs to get tugged on and pulled and pushed for different components, or at least different publics, the bikes and peds, for instance, and so on. So I would really like to keep that one on the table because it has a lot of potential. And I think with some adjustments, this could be a really good addition to Palo Alto. The downside is it takes a long time to construct, and the viaduct is much easier, and that bothers me a bit, but it has potential in my opinion.
Okay, so Phil, did you understand the question about the daylight plane?
No, sorry. I was, maybe Ripon was going to speak to it, but Ripon was just sharing some information with me about the noise report, going back to Greg's earlier question, and maybe Ripon wants to share that right now. Sorry, Tony.
It's okay.
Sure. I think there is some of that information that both Greg and Tony is looking for in the noise report. I was looking at the noise report on page. I just read that and scrolled. So in short, what I was going to say is that the noise report does say that they further did the evaluation to put the parapet walls for both hybrid and underpass option, and it would further reduce the noise levels. And they have a predicted noise levels table in the noise report for if the parapet or the sound walls of similar acoustical specifications were put for the hybrid options.
Okay, so I will go back and read it more carefully then. Thanks.
No,
Okay.
I mean, it's on page 33, I believe. I was looking into that one.
I just have the decibel table in front of me. I'm going to be referring it to a lot this week.
So
Okay.
we have a minute left, but I
Thanks.
wanted to make sure that Philip, you understood Tony's question. So Tony wanted to know if you could get down to, if we could get from AECOM the exact position of the viaduct down to within a foot, because that will help him understand the daylight plane, which for him is a kind of a deciding factor.
Right. I did hear that question. I just have to tell you, and I'm hearing a lot of background noise.
That might be me. Hold on.
Sorry. But I don't know that that's something where we can get that precise at this point in time on any of these alternatives. Precise measurements like that within a foot, I think is pretty unrealistic.
How about within 5 feet? What's realistic? Within 5 feet, or
Philip, to add on to that one, to your answer, noise report does show the distances of the fences from the proposed alignment of the viaduct and hybrid options. So
but aren't they guesstimates, or are they actual estimates? Like,
No,
like are they
Those are estimates, but I'd say to say that they're within a foot is probably unlikely, or it's possible, but I'd say it's maybe not perfect.
Well, and I don't
I mean,
remember
it
if it's the viaduct or the hybrid that swings away from the homes.
I
It's
think
the viaduct.
It's the viaduct.
We can
Yeah.
verify.
In the current
So
design.
it should be approximate. I mean, if you're within 5 feet, at least tell us what that margin of error would be. It will really help in determining how we look at zoning and buildings that are next to each other and so on.
Well, I think that's a question that really cannot be answered at this point, how perfect the estimates are. I'd say that they're estimates at this point in, the level of design that we're at. There's going to be places where they're probably bang on, and there's going to be places where there's some variation. Hopefully
Could
not.
they tell us the upper bound, like within a 12 feet variance, so Tony can run his own calculations? I mean, nobody's going to hold them to, well, you moved it 3 feet. Tony's just trying to make some broad calculations and understand.
I think what's shown, what Ripon referenced is what's shown is what is their best estimate. And I think that that's an estimate that, we can use at this level of planning phase.
So is there a section that shows the backyard, the fence, and then the height of the viaduct? There's nothing that told me that there was some section like that. And if it's approximate, I'm good with that, but at least I need to know. I think everyone, I mean, the neighbors are going to want to know.
Yeah, I mean,
50
if
people.
you go on the page, like page number 17 of the AECOM report, it shows the height of the viaduct, and then it shows the distances from the first row of homes, not the fences, but the first,
Right.
Here, actually, I found the report, guys. So can you tell me what page it is, Ripon?
It is, I'm looking at page number 17.
Okay, let's see. Now this is not great for scrolling. A PDF page or page number?
Actually, PDF page is 16, I think. It's AECOM 16.
Okay, 16. Is there a graphic? What am I looking for? Okay, hold on. There we go.
So existing conditions for all.
Yeah. I have seen this one before, but we really need a little bit more detail in order to make a good judgment. I mean, I think we need a blow up of at least the first row of homes.
I mean, I think, Tony, what they're saying is that at this level of 5% engineering, they don't have that. So this is the best we have, and this is unfortunately exactly what makes this so hard.
Okay.
So the renderings have an example section. Is that not sufficient? I mean, I have one here. The PDF takes 20 minutes to load, but it's typical. It's not an exact section.
If you tell me which page it is, I can pull it up because I saved all of them on my computer. So
Well, the rendering I have is the one titled Meadow and Charles Viaduct Alternative P&P Default.
Okay, hold on. Let me find that. This is for the viaduct.
Yeah.
Viaduct, and it's called. Is it a rendering or the plan drawing?
It's the plan drawing, right?
Okay.
The plan and profile.
I think just to the point, I don't think that's what Tony wants, though. I think what Tony wants is the complete measurement. So I don't think that's going to be helpful. And I think,
yeah,
I don't think that's not going to come at this phase of the project.
So this is the picture, and I'll try to zoom in here so you guys can see. And
I'm familiar with these.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not helpful. Okay.
They're not exactly to scale.
Yeah, what Tony's trying to understand is like from here to here, what is the light
I'll
plane
just tell you that
happens?
I've known
Greg,
Jennifer
would you
longer
mind
than
muting?
Jesse. I'm happy to
Sorry.
Jesse recently, and I'll tell you
To Jim.
I think what Tony, if I understand the question, is trying to understand is like, what is the light plane that's caused depending on the location of this track when it's permanently moved away from the homes versus the fences and the existing structures? Is
Yes,
that, is
correct,
it accurate?
right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, we've reached our.
Is
Yeah.
Gregory, the page number is 23 on the report. About
Oh, on the sound one? Okay. Okay, folks can go look it up. It's 7:05. You guys have all been troopers. I'm gonna let you go. We'll pick this up next week. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.